This story began with a flashback from the protagonist's life. He appeared on a huge billboard. The arena was packed, and the audience went wild as the duelists made their entrance. He was the star of the championship that day, so when he entered, the commotion grew even louder. With a shift in the scene, it showed another world where gladiators were welcomed with hatred. They were all surrounding the protagonist, who felt small among so many strong gladiators. Even one of the big guys mocked his name and the clothes the protagonist was wearing. However, at some point, two warriors recognized each other from somewhere else. One of them accused the other of being the one who eliminated him during a duel. With that, both started emanating an atmosphere of hostility. So the protagonist clenched his teeth, thinking a serious fight was about to break out. Both the man with the brown beard and the one with the black braided beard were filled with rage. That led the protagonist to look seriously at both of them, assuming they were enemies. But right after, the two locked arms and acknowledged each other as skilled fighters. However, the black-bearded one was happy because it meant the brown-bearded guy had been eliminated shortly after. He told how a young guy with 3 braids came running, shouting for his father while hitting him in the stomach. He pointed to the scar left from that stabbing. The black-bearded man celebrated, raising his arms and saying the son had avenged the old man. While the two celebrated and shouted, the protagonist turned pale as a sheet of paper. He had no idea how he ended up in that place and how, just 6 days earlier, he had been celebrating. He was excited, fighting as he knew how, with his mouse, keyboard, and furious fingers. He remembered he was about to win the world championship for the 3rd time when he felt a sharp pain. Now it made sense. After that sharp pain, he assumed he had died. Holding his hand to his head, he thought this couldn't be a dream and started screaming while a woman tried to talk to him. She pointed at him and said he was a champion who had fought many duels. That's why several of those competitors were eager to duel him at least once. The woman with white hair and dressed like a gladiator pointed directly at the protagonist. He, with his glasses and blue eyes, was stunned. When the girl winked and gave him a thumbs up, the protagonist kept remembering the strong heartbeat he felt before collapsing face first onto his equipment. Now he saw himself from outside his body, slumped over his gear. Right after that, he felt an intense light and had to raise his hand to his eyes to avoid being blinded. The light brought with it a character, a woman with white hair dressed like a gladiator. She explained that those who lost their lives at the end of a glorious battle possessed the soul of a warrior. While listening to this, the protagonist still kept his hands over his face. He stared at the golden pendant holding the gladiator's outfit and asked if he had really died. The woman, showing compassion, asked him to follow her, even though he wanted to know where they were going, whether it was punishment or something like that. She didn't answer. Still, he gave her his hand, feeling a bit intimidated. After that, she held on tight, and both of them launched at high speed toward a place filled with colorful lights. Looking down, she said they were going to Valhalla. Upon hearing that strange name he'd never heard before, he reacted awkwardly. The colorful light grew more intense with each second, and with that, the flashback came to an end. Now he understood that place was the afterlife in Norse mythology, and that he could only be there if he were a warrior. Looking at the woman, he thought she had mistaken him for some great warrior. Feeling shy, he politely said he wasn't actually a real warrior, but a professional video game player. Because of that, he asked her to take him back, but she just ignored him. He looked at someone blowing a huge horn, an instrument held by a man with massive arms. The white-haired woman announced they were under enemy attack and that the battle was about to begin. The protagonist, surrounded by so many barbarians, thought the whole situation was insane. Both sides of the battle were about to collide, all heavily armed. There were all kinds of figures, some even looked like a massive pack of human wolves. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood off to the side, just watching those wolves and barbarians fight. He trembled like a leaf and wondered how he ended up in such a strange place. The strangest part was realizing he'd arrived there after his death. Now holding a sword and shaking, he looked up and saw the massive enemies. He was only thinking about what would happen if he got hit there too, while one of the enemies charged forward. A gladiator told the young man to duck, saying he would take care of that wolf. That's when someone threw a massive punch that looked like a giant glowing hand. The angry man asked if the boy knew nothing about sagas. He was so mad that he bared his teeth, with veins bulging on his forehead. Meanwhile, the young man simply held his head and had a completely lost look on his face. The great fighter asked if the protagonist understood the true meaning of the word saga. The warrior explained the origin of that place, mentioning heroic feats, battles, and personal transformations. He narrated that everyone there had achieved great merits, being remembered through many eras. He also explained that in that world, achievements were the strength that made someone a respected warrior. The protagonist listened with wide eyes, reflecting on his own experiences and past accomplishments. With a finger on his cheek, he dove into thoughts that wandered through distant memories of his life. He thought so much that sweat began to drip, and he rubbed his chin. Restless, he remembered that his routine consisted only of eating, gaming, and wasting days without purpose. He recalled his favorite player, whose image had always served as constant inspiration in hard times. That memory fired him up, reigniting a spark of hope in his tired eyes. He thought that by using the achievements of the immortal warrior, he might actually have a real chance. Suddenly, he felt an electric current shoot through his body, surprising him with its intensity and vigor. He discovered that he could accumulate electric energy in the palms of his hands with incredible ease. The warrior smiled, saying his saga had just begun, and pointed at floating letters in the air. He could see the glowing letters but couldn't interpret them, as if they were in another language. He tried using an image translator, but a status window unexpectedly popped open. He felt more confident when he saw that he was accessing 1% of the immortal warrior's power. The warrior warned that the real challenges were yet to come, and that nothing would be easy. The protagonist looked up and was startled to see a monstrous creature staring right at him. Without time to react, the creature struck him, sending him flying with brutal force. He rolled across the ground, crashing into rocks and wooden debris, feeling pain all over his body. Even so, he managed to stand up, staggering but determined to face that challenge to the end. He stared at the enemy, remembering Kalstad, and found it strange to feel so weak now. He imagined his game character defeating the creature with ease, like it was a trivial gesture. Noticing something wrong on the status bar, he squinted, forcing his eyes to see more clearly. Then he read that his synchronization rate with the immortal warrior was only 1%. He was outraged because the letters were way too small, making it hard to read and interpret correctly. The warrior declared that his help ended there, and that it was time to fight. Turning around, he revealed his name, Bjorn, and told him to survive until they met again. Now alone, the protagonist had to come up with a strategy, even without fully understanding how that power worked. Still, he believed that 1% of the power would be enough to fight that violent creature. He ran toward the monster, determined to grab his sword and launch a counterattack. He remembered that the immortal warrior had faced hundreds of soldiers alone, which gave him courage. So now, even surrounded by enemies, he felt determined to fight with everything he had. The creature raised a massive hammer, and the protagonist studied its movements, waiting for the right moment. He thought about fighting alongside the legend, sharing the battlefield as an ally. The beast attacked, but he dodged swiftly, evading precise and violent blows. Each dodge left the creature more confused and the protagonist more confident in his skills. The crowd roared with each move, and he began to believe in his own inner strength. He knew that the immortal warrior was like a storm, devastating everything with furious elegance. He wished to master his new powers the same way and win, just like he did in the games he loved. The battle raged on around him, and the warrior silently fought his own heroic saga. Electricity made his eyes glow intensely as he struck with skill and confidence. Still adapting to his powers, he showed visible progress despite the difficulties and pressure. In the present, he sat down, trying to catch his breath amidst the destruction and ruins. He realized that activating an achievement automatically triggered a new saga as part of a cycle. He also noticed that the newly acquired skill was an upgraded version with a stronger impact. The scene shifted to a large, well-lit building, full of movement, laughter, and celebration. Inside, warriors raised their cups, toasting joyfully, celebrating the end of the initial battle. They said this was just the warm-up, excited about what was still to come. Meanwhile, the protagonist ate quietly, isolated, staring at a suspicious-looking piece of cake. He wondered if that was really the banquet for the night, where they only served meat and alcohol. Someone told him that if he wanted to eat better, he'd have to rise to a higher class. They said that this was the beginner's banquet, with minimal restrictions and perks allowed. Curious, he asked Bjorn if he also belonged to that low-class group with no privileges. Bjorn just smiled, saying he had only come down to discreetly observe him during the initial trial. Then the protagonist realized that he only survived because the warrior had given him essential guidance. He remembered that without that conversation about sagas, he would have been defeated by the monster at the very beginning. He asked what would happen if he died in that world, fearing the possible irreversible consequences. Bjorn replied that he would become a steel warrior without hunger, pain, or emotions. For Bjorn, that was a blessing, but for the protagonist, it seemed like a horrible and grim fate. He then firmly decided that he would do everything possible not to die in that strange world. Bjorn warned that his affiliation was about to happen, pointing seriously toward the center of the hall. A figure with determined steps and golden boots that gleamed under the light appeared. On stage, someone announced that the warriors should witness the deeds of this memorable day. A woman with orange hair and golden armor appeared to speak about the legions. The protagonist immediately recognized her. She was the legendary Valkyrie, revered in many ancient stories. The man beside him revealed that she was the daughter of Odin, the most feared warrior. She raised her sword and ordered everyone to look carefully at the contents of their cups. The protagonist thought the only Norse gods he knew were Odin and Thor. Now with his eyes fixed on the liquid, he hoped to be chosen by one of them. And so finally began the first chapter of his personal legend, forged through strength and courage. Now the protagonist is seen in a small boat along with a woman with red hair. He doesn't seem very pleased as the woman steers the small boat. The protagonist was deep in thought, wondering how anyone could call this the Legion of the Gods. He kept rubbing his head and stomping his feet against the boat's floor. Seeing his frustration, the woman said that nobody there complained or did poor work. Hearing that, the boy thought she was at least a bit crazy, considering he was the only one there. He remembered when he was staring into the cup, hoping for a god he actually recognized to come out. After staring deeply into that cup, the name Idun appeared. Meanwhile, several warriors around him were shouting that they had gotten gods like Odin and Thor. The boy kept a grumpy expression. It got even worse when a friend told him to hang in there, giving him a look full of sympathy. People were yelling for anyone from Odin's legion to come forward. A woman with silver hair waved her arms, calling those affiliated with the god Odin. The line was already enormous for the most famous gods and goddesses. Meanwhile, the protagonist was seen walking in his sneakers, kicking up dust as he searched for his place. He looked in every direction and saw no legion he could possibly belong to. He noticed a young woman up ahead and figured maybe it was over there. She was crouched down and seemed bored, even cleaning her ear like she had nothing better to do. Her eyes looked half asleep and she moved sluggishly. Everything changed when the boy politely asked to speak with her. It got even better when he said he was from Idun's legion. Her eyes lit up. Getting very close to him, she shouted that he was a newbie. She could hardly believe it. As he blushed from how close she was standing, she simply grabbed his arm. Now back to the present, he looked at that same girl sitting in the boat and felt far from happy. He asked Hida why they were fighting and why there was a war going on. At that moment, his gaze was determined and entirely focused on the girl. She raised one hand and radiated mana from her palm to explain it better. Using mana, she created a kind of map to show exactly where they were. The protagonist grew interested in a reddish area and asked what that was. After her explanation, a flash of realization struck him. He thought he was in Ragnarok. Speaking with wide, focused eyes, he said it was more or less like that. They were in a battle for the fate of the world. As he said that, he imagined it was like fighting against multiple dragons and celestial beings. There were also absurdly strong beings battling each other. In general, they were all just trying to survive. As she spoke about those things, he remembered the battle where he saw many people fighting on behalf of humanity. That made him wonder if it was possible to travel between different worlds. Widening his eyes a bit more, he thought that meant he might be able to return to his original world. That's when the boat pulled up close to a shore, and she announced that they had arrived. As they walked, she explained that this was the entrance to the goddess's temple. While they walked together, he wanted to know if he would be able to see the goddess there. The young woman looked at him and said she would come, but from a distance, not in person. After reaching a circle, she asked him to step closer, as the goddess resided in a higher place. She handed him a golden apple and asked him to stand on the altar and drop the apple. He positioned himself at the designated spot, thinking that this way he could perform the invocation correctly. He gently released the golden apple, which slowly fell until it touched the ground. Then, an intense golden light illuminated the entire area. He heard his name being spoken by the goddess. It was Idun, the goddess of life and youth. She asked him to come closer. Shielding his eyes from the bright light, he tried to look at her. When his eyes adjusted, he could see a woman near a tree. She was tall and blonde. With his mouth open, he thought that she truly was a goddess. His body trembled. His body acted almost on its own, like water flowing from top to bottom, pushing him to kneel. He was in the correct posture to show reverence to someone of such magnitude. His body displayed respect. She placed her hand on his head and began to bestow blessings. She said that with these blessings, his body would be protected even from the danger of death. He began to feel the goddess's blessing along with the sigil of life. He looked at his hands, feeling the power. Spreading his arms, light shone from his eyes and mouth. It was youth and strength. He felt that the chronic back pain and body strain from being a professional gamer were fading away. The goddess, realizing that this servant would be of great help, said she expected his future contributions. After everything, he was trembling on the ground. Seeing a goddess up close had truly been intense for him. With that, Hida approached, satisfied to see that he had obtained the goddess's blessing. While the girl explained that this goddess was Idun, the young man could only think about how beautiful the goddess was. Hida also told him that as he leveled up, the blessing would become even stronger. That seemed to cheer him up. The protagonist thought for a moment, as if formulating a question. Meanwhile, the young woman watched him. He asked if, once he defeated the enemies, he could return. He looked at her seriously because he was talking about returning to his old life and his original world. As the young man turned red, the girl tried to guess his thoughts, and with that, she smiled, thinking that he was really cute. She extended her hand toward him to help him get up and said that when the war was over, he could go back if he wanted. When he looked at the girl with her hand outstretched, he thought that nobody would be foolish enough not to want to leave. He just wanted, for now, to be sure that he could actually leave and return to his world. When her hand touched his, he blushed even more. He could only think about how soft and warm her touch was. Every time she got close, he would turn red, hold his breath, and start trembling. While the two were sitting in a simple place eating a meal, Hida said that if they raised their class, even the food and the resting area would improve. Smiling, she said they should work hard for it. Meanwhile, he was daydreaming about a romance with that red-haired girl and even imagined having a child with her. Outside that resting area, Hida explained that every time he defeated an enemy, he would receive something called a rune. He thought about what he had felt, as if a red energy had been absorbed into his body. Opening his hand, he showed something and asked her if that was a rune and if he could use it to increase his abilities. She showed him that it could be used to boost strength, stamina, agility, mana, and even willpower. Raising a finger, she told the protagonist that mana strengthens one's own magic and increases magical defense. He imagined a scenario where a great dragon was being hunted by a hunter. As she explained that even the hunt of a simple snake could become a legend about slaying dragons. When talking about sagas, the hero remembered his big, muscular, tattooed friend, and at the speed he had, the young woman explained that speed wasn't exactly a saga. Then she showed how she made flames sprout from her hands, and said that was the effect of sagas. The protagonist, upon hearing that they could create weapons, transform, or even summon armies, was left speechless. While still producing a sword made of flames, she told him to remember, the power to develop a saga was entirely in his hand. With that, he started sweating and thought that he needed to build his own story, just like in the games where he played using the Legend of the Dragon Knight, where the main character. He was an immortal knight with a strong expression and determined eyes. However, his thoughts and her explanations were interrupted when they heard a loud noise. Looking back, he noticed that the guard was sounding the alarm, ringing a huge bell to announce the enemy's arrival. Now that small resting field had to be cleared, as everyone was heading into battle to face the enemies. The protagonist looked at the young woman and she told him that sound was the order to head into battle. Right in front of them, a violet light began to radiate and it seemed like a kind of portal was opening. Looking at it, he immediately imagined what it could be, and the young woman warned that by passing through the purple portal, he would already be in the waiting area where real warriors would face each other. Now once again trembling and holding his breath like he always did when the girl came close, she adjusted his clothes, smoothing out his outfit with her hands, saying that he looked very good. Tired of holding his breath, he quickly turned away, still blushing, and said he was going. He looked back to see her one more time, but was still a bit embarrassed and red-faced. She asked him in a sweet tone not to die, while watching him leave, completely trembling. The protagonist, upon hearing the young woman's words, became even more cautious. He didn't even remember what she had said earlier, that it was very hard to die thanks to the blessing of the goddess Idun. The red-haired girl simply watched the intensity in the protagonist's words. As he walked toward the portal, she just watched him silently. Passing through the portal, he felt something strange, and within seconds he was already inside an arena. Noticing that he was surrounded by so many people, he figured it must be a very important battle, until someone noticed his presence, called him, and gave him a light pat on the back. The protagonist jumped in surprise and turned around to see who was behind him, but then he realized it was his friend Bjorn, who said they had met once again. The muscular man with a smile said the protagonist looked much better. Then he asked if the Valkyrie taking care of him was pretty and gave him another pat on the back, still smiling. In front of the protagonist stood a knight with a metal helmet and an enigmatic gaze. The fight would be between legions, and he seemed to be alone in his legion. The man in front of him asked if he was a warrior of Idun. The man with a large black mustache said it was strange for him to be alone like that. Then he ordered him to move to the back of the line. He wanted to skip introductions and announced that his name was Ragnar. At the end of the sentence, the protagonist heard that the man was from Heimdall's legion. That man was the first to step into a portal. He raised his sword and declared that they would fight for Asgard. With that, each legion had a portal open in front of them, except for the protagonist, who ended up in a different legion. The man with the mustache announced that he would always lead from the vanguard and asked everyone to stay behind him. With that, the crowd shouted that he was a real man. Ragnar was the best, but the protagonist just listened. Meanwhile, the First Fleet was fighting the enemies while waiting for reinforcements. When they saw the portal glowing in violet tones, they were encouraged but continued fighting against the Sarvasos. The leader there announced that reinforcements were arriving and that they should keep pressing the enemy. However, they stopped at a certain point when they heard a thunderous noise. Looking up, they noticed an abnormal creature. It was many times larger and wielded a massive hammer. Now all the warriors were frightened. They had no idea what that thing on top of the mountain was. The creature jumped with its huge metal hammer and its glowing red eyes. The leap of that white beast was enough to destroy a large part of the ground and launch several warriors into the air. That was the boss, White Fang, a wolf with a massive scar over its eye. Around that creature, the destruction was massive, and now everyone was surrounding it. They were certain that this giant was 4 to 5 times larger than the others. A portal opened right behind that gigantic monster, When it noticed the violet glow, it looked back, bared its teeth, and tightened its expression with those red eyes. With that, the new soldiers and reinforcements led by Ragnar had arrived. However, upon seeing that enormous creature radiating a red aura, they grew disheartened. The man leading them widened his eyes, his stance now showing total imbalance. With a powerful strike of its hammer, the creature hurled several warriors far away. The last to come out of the portal was the protagonist who, having stayed behind, could barely see what was happening. He seemed serious and calm until that moment, even with that white monster opening its mouth exaggeratedly, showing its teeth and fierce breath. And so, the protagonist reacted. He simply frowned and put on an angry expression. The hero needed to stay calm. Now it was him against the White Fang, a true boss. Behind his glasses, he opened his huge blue eyes, desperately trying to think of any possible strategy. He looked up, hoping to come up with an idea, noticing how gigantic the hammer was. Reflecting on his studies, he knew he wouldn't survive a hit with that small shield. So he decided to throw the shield away, believing it would only get in the way in such a tough fight. He was determined to use all the runes he had, even if they weren't many. It was all or nothing, so he summoned the 5 runes and focused everything on agility. As he looked up, the shadow of the massive hammer completely covered his body. The attack was about to hit him, but he still hadn't moved. He felt satisfied because, even though it was fast, he managed to see the strike and dodge in time. All the warriors around were impressed by his sudden and precise dodge. The surprise, however, left them vulnerable, and they were hit shortly after by the enemy. While the White Fang swung the hammer, the protagonist was seen moving at extremely high speed. With a terrified face, he thought that dodging was useless and maybe attacking the legs could work. He wished the warriors would aim for the enemy's legs, trying to stop it together. He believed they could immobilize it, so he stood there watching as everyone attacked at the same time. He quickly realized the tactic was flawed, as they were all hit with extreme ease. The White Wolf seemed determined to hit the protagonist this time, with burning eyes. The only method he could think of at that moment was to use his dash technique. He prepared to use his saga, the charge of a warrior that resembles a storm. He launched himself at the exact moment, narrowly dodging the incoming overhead strike. Noticing the enemy had its guard down, he saw his chance and prepared for a dash attack. Without hesitation, the protagonist threw himself at the monster, determined to finish the fight. The protagonist simply lunged at that monster. At that moment, the hero thought he had to survive this battlefield. He remembered his Valkyrie asking him not to die, so he would do his best to see her again. He also recalled the advice Hida gave him about the power to summon and develop a saga. She said it was up to him alone to fulfill that role. The hero was furious. He had to destroy the monster as quickly as possible. That's why he launched himself toward the monster without showing fear. The saga would be the charge of a warrior. While in the air, he thought about how he could move better to kick and jump at the same time. And so he did, kicking the air, gaining incredible speed, and accelerating faster and faster toward the monster. Until, like an arrow, he struck the boss who, although managing to block, didn't do it in time. The boss dodged, causing the hero to crash into the ground, even sinking into it where he fell. Now the White Wolf was suffering in pain because the hero had hit one of its eyes. However, the protagonist wasn't in the best condition either, since he had smashed face first into the ground. After getting out of the hole he made upon falling, he looked at the monster. The boss had a sword lodged in its eye. At that moment, the protagonist realized there was an opening to finish the boss. It was now or never. With his eyes radiating a blue glow, he thought he needed a weapon, so he raised his hand and summoned a saga. The saga would be the warrior's sword, and while the monster writhed in pain, he managed to create a sword made of electricity. While the boss summoned several of the other monsters, howling together, the warriors around were left speechless. With an intense blue in his eyes, the protagonist turned to unleash his attack. Elsewhere, a Valkyrie watched what was happening through the stars. She was placing the pieces back in their proper place when a black crow visited her. As soon as she noticed the presence of the crow, she went to greet him. However, she mistakenly identified the crow, confusing his name. After the crow caught her attention, she simply sighed with her head down. The crow asked her if anyone had stood out. She paused for a moment. Then the crow, shouting, asked if there was no one among the lower-class warriors. That's when she remembered someone and gave a gentle smile. Recalling the protagonist's face, she said an interesting individual had emerged. Meanwhile, back at the battlefield, the protagonist had successfully and gloriously defeated the White Wolf leader. With scratches on his face and still holding the sword, he noticed that everyone was cheering for him. Seeing all those people shouting his name and raising their weapons into the air left him completely paralyzed. He was still standing on top of the huge boss while receiving that celebration. It felt incredibly familiar, reminding him of when he won several championships and raised the trophy. With that thought, he looked at his sword and noticed it was the runic fang. That sword had once been one of the most powerful in the server he used to play on, but it quickly fell out of favor. This meant he was still at a low level when he obtained that sword. but the player felt an overwhelming desire to keep hearing that cheering. With focused eyes, he thought about how much he wanted to become stronger. He wanted to become the god of war. So he raised his hand holding the sword, believing that he was going to become the best in Valhalla. At that moment, his friend Jorn arrived, greeting him and placing a hand on his shoulder. Facing the protagonist, he said that he had improved a lot in handling his saga. The protagonist showed his friend that he could make the sword appear and disappear whenever he wanted. With that, his friend gave a big smile, saying that now it was time for them to get moving. While the hero thought they were heading back, Jorn pointed toward the place they would attack the next day. So they set up their tents and made a camp with bonfires and sturdy cabins. None of these tents had heaters on the outside. The protagonist threw himself onto his bed, thinking that the day had been way too long. Still lying there, he stopped and reflected that, for a moment, there were things he simply couldn't believe. He needed to figure out how much stronger he had become since arriving in that place. So he activated the strange letters that encoded his status bar. He was satisfied to see that the synchronization rate had improved, and he had also gained an extra saga slot. That's when someone came quickly and opened the tent looking for him. It was a man with a big grin and a large beard, telling him that he had a visitor. When he noticed outside, there were several people smiling and giving him a thumbs up. Stepping out of the tent, things weren't any different. Everyone was staring at him in a strange way. Looking ahead, he realized why. Even he widened his eyes, and sweat dripped from his face. A few people stared with increasingly red eyes. He noticed that standing before him was his Valkyrie near the fire in a pose that left him blushing. Noticing his presence, she immediately stood up and looked at him with a slightly shy smile. A short time later, he was back inside his own tent, and she was in tears while apologizing. The protagonist just watched her, eyes wide, not understanding why she was crying. She said she wanted him to show her all his achievements, and he didn't even know it was possible to share them with others. When he finally managed to show her, she was stunned, widening her eyes as she read every achievement he had accomplished. With that, she started crying even harder, dropping to her knees, trembling, and sobbing uncontrollably. Even in panic, she still had an adorable and charming presence in his eyes. Knowing he needed to explain the situation, he told her that despite the achievements, everything had been earned inside a game. Inside the tent, he tried to show that it was all the result of virtual accomplishments. She partly understood, but still recognized that all those achievements belonged to him and were extraordinary. The hero widened his eyes as if remembering something from the past. He recalled that, in life, he had managed to get exempted from military service precisely because of that. He thought there was something very strange about feeling comfortable even after death. Hida said that, in any case, he should continue developing his saga, since there was no limit to how many sagas he could have. She informed him that, at his current level, he couldn't create more than one saga at a time. Pointing with her finger, she said that he probably wouldn't be able to create another one for quite a while. With that information in mind, he looked at his own status bar and thought about how he should reformulate his saga. Looking closely, he saw that synchronization, as well as the effects for speed and weapon creation, were stable. He realized he still needed something more offensive since he didn't have any attack skills, so he thought about creating a saga with the power of a dragon's eyes. He made an impressive grimace when he realized that saga was extremely interesting. It even managed to scare his Valkyrie a little, and he found that kind of amusing. He noticed that with that saga, even his vision had improved drastically, so he removed his glasses. His eyes were now glowing a deep, intense blue, and he realized he had acquired the ability to see through things. That's how he looked at Hida and noticed her name, her nickname, and also realized he could see through her clothes. Upon realizing that he had accidentally activated the X-ray vision over her body, he was completely shocked. Soon after, he appeared with his face bandaged, believing he had come very close to a tragic end. While the young woman didn't exactly understand what had happened, even without fully understanding, she knew he was someone extraordinary and that in the future he would become the strongest. In a sudden act, she hugged him tightly and said he was the lucky charm of that legion. With that, his eyes almost popped out and his face turned intensely red. His physical reaction was so strong that it even caused the tent itself to shake. After the Valkyrie left, the tent was visited again, this time by a tall man with green hair. He entered and asked if that was the tent of the warrior Li Taho. Meanwhile, the protagonist wore something metallic on his head, leaving only his blue eyes visible. Even so, he analyzed that warrior using X-ray mode to check if he was telling the truth. He confirmed that the man was truthful about his name and intentions, but he also saw the warrior's naked body. This made him extremely irritated, and he began sweating, deciding to turn off the X-ray mode immediately. Meanwhile, an aurora borealis was visible in the distance between the mountains. The warrior said he envied the protagonist for having been visited by a Valkyrie. Even with a serious expression, the green-haired warrior was slightly blushing when he made that statement. The hero reflected that it felt like being visited by a celebrity. He asked the warrior what blessing had been granted to his legion. The green-haired man signaled with his fingers that there were two: stealth and tracking. He demonstrated his stealth ability, which left the protagonist satisfied. Then he explained that the tracking ability worked like a precise pursuit of an enemy. After that, they were all gathered around a large bonfire, while the protagonist was being guided by the warrior to the commander. The young hero was startled to realize that the commander was a woman. He hadn't seen many women until then, only Valkyries. It was the first time he had seen a woman in a commanding position in that place, which impressed him greatly. As she spoke to him, the commander slowly stood up, showing signs of fatigue. When she finally stood upright, her aura felt extremely intimidating. She stood like a wolf at her peak, upright beside the warrior. She told the protagonist that the chief commander would arrive shortly and asked him to wait. He noticed that she belonged to the Legion of Ullr and had the nickname Human Hunter. Shortly after, a light began descending from the sky, and the soldiers realized it was the arrival of a Valkyrie. She descended rapidly from the sky, drawing the attention of all the warriors present. The woman had silver hair and wore light-colored clothes. The protagonist looked at her with admiration, finding her incredible and recognizing that this was the Valkyrie Raskrid. She carried the title with the nickname Ice Princess, which was probably given to her by the warriors themselves. The woman announced that she was Raskrid from the Legion of Odin, and that she was now in charge of that battlefield. She said that Rasnir had not survived and had passed away. Then a portrait of him surrounded by flowers was shown in his honor. Standing before the Valkyrie was Ciri, the commander responsible for those warriors. Kindly, Ciri greeted the Valkyrie and promised to honor her duties. Meanwhile, Razrid held a scroll of fire between her hands. She said that it recorded the efforts of each person and that there would be rewards for those who contributed significantly. The protagonist's eyes widened upon hearing his name being mentioned. It was announced that he had defeated the leader of the Null unit, that giant, and as a reward, he would receive gold coins and a rune. He was pleased to hear that his legion would earn 10 contribution points, but he thought he shouldn't show it with a smile. He overheard someone commenting that this was the warrior who had been visited by a Valkyrie. Now everyone saluted him and thought he was amazing for having received such a visit. He gave a doubtful look, not understanding that being visited by a Valkyrie was an even greater achievement than defeating a boss. The silver-haired Valkyrie asked for silence, saying it was time to conquer the fortress. She said they would use a technique known as Steel Rain and that all warriors would board. Everyone was shouting with excitement, while the protagonist had no idea what that meant. He asked the green-haired knight what she was talking about, but not even he knew for sure. Realizing that not even the other understood, he was stunned, wondering how they could celebrate something they didn't even understand. The Valkyrie Raskrid watched from above with her white wings spread wide, and a few feathers fell from them. The silver-haired woman shouted for the warriors to fight with more strength. Meanwhile, the enemy army was demonstrating all its power with loud battle cries. For that reason, the warriors led by that Valkyrie couldn't fall behind, and also showed their potential. The enemy leader was observing the entire scene unfold. That giant wolf with a bloodthirsty gaze was the boss blood-stained gaze. He stood on high ground, watching how his soldiers fought against the warriors of the skies. The battle was escalating and seemed to be balanced. Following the orders of Valkyrie Raskrid, they were supposed to form a siege and gain an advantage through enemy fire. After that, Commander Ciri's unit would breach the fortress gates and reach the control room. Rolf spoke as if he knew exactly what the so-called Steel Rain was, while the protagonist just watched and judged silently. The protagonist thought that the Steel Rain might be some kind of teleportation magic, but he discovered, within minutes, that it was nothing magical, just something real and extremely uncomfortable. They loaded some warriors into giant barrels with some protective padding and launched them. Inside one of those barrels, his friend asked him if he was excited. Taho looked to the side and saw that his big burly friend was out of control, loving that weird contraption. When a warrior announced that they were ready to be launched, he did so by blowing the horn. For the protagonist, everything seemed terribly uncomfortable, so he prayed for help from the goddess Idun. He grabbed the safety bars inside that giant barrel, closed his eyes, and just called out for Hida. Once they were positioned, they were ready to be launched a considerable distance. After the huge barrel was loaded into the cannon, it was fired toward the fortress walls. Just as the protagonist imagined, the launch was indeed extremely uncomfortable. But his big friend was having the time of his life. His eyes were sparkling with excitement. Several of those giant barrels were launched into the enemy fortress. One by one, they crashed down, shattering on impact, throwing the warriors inside them onto the battlefield. With all that noise, they caused massive chaos among the enemies, who quickly gathered for a counterattack. The launched warriors crawled out of the barrels in terrible condition, complaining about sharp pains. But their leader, the beautiful commander with blue hair, got out without any issues and was already ordering a swift attack on the enemy. The warriors looked ahead and saw massive spiders with enormous legs. Those spiders would not be easy enemies, they were gigantic insects, and the worst part was that there were many of them, already forming a blockade that made it hard for the warriors to move. Logic dictated that they should take out the leader of the insects first, as the others would flee without fighting. But as the green-haired warrior told the protagonist, it was hard to recognize the leader since they all looked the same. At that moment, the protagonist's eyes lit up with a blue magic glow, and he managed to identify the leader. For him, the leader's information appeared in capital letters showing exactly the name of each one. With that, he informed the leader that he could identify them thanks to a saga he possessed. Hearing this, the blue-haired commander didn't hesitate and jumped forward. She positioned herself in front of the protagonist, who was startled to see her body so close to his. He quickly blushed and asked what was going on, and she ordered him to point his finger toward the leader. With no time for further reactions, the young man activated his eyes again. Already understanding the commander's intention, he pointed his finger in the direction of the leader, and the woman instantly fired her arrows that way. That's how they managed to defeat most of the leaders. That partnership between the protagonist and Commander Siri was working perfectly. All around, the warriors were loving it, noticing how the protagonist was always surrounded by beautiful women. Excited, he kept pointing his finger, revealing to the commander every monster that needed to be eliminated. Seeing that, the warriors also decided to help, hoping to speed up the job and finish more quickly. In no time, they were eliminating the leaders of each group since every group had 5 spiders. Without their leaders, the spiders became disoriented, not knowing what to do, and began retreating. Just as they had imagined from the start, the spiders pulled back, opening up the blockade. But the sound of a horn announced that more enemies were on the way. At the same rate that the spiders retreated from the battlefield, other enemies were arriving to face them. The young hero alerted the commander that more enemies were approaching, and she looked back and said they needed to split up. The green-haired young man understood that he and the protagonist should head in a different direction. Lillian ordered Lee Tahoe to lead the way for the green-haired young man. Before leaving, the commander shot a confident look at the protagonist and told him she trusted him. The young man simply placed his closed hand on his chest as a sign of gratitude. After that, the special squad was formed, and they would enter the chamber with only 4 warriors. The hero was startled when someone grabbed his arm firmly. It was Rolf, who asked him to stay close because he would use his saga. As soon as the green-haired young man activated the blessing of his goddess, everyone became stealthy. With that, being invisible, they were able to leave unnoticed while the others were still fighting the battle. Using his tracking talent, the green-haired young man noticed the presence of a secret door. By placing his hand in the right spot, it opened, revealing a staircase leading downward. Now they were at a higher point, seeing that staircase emerge from the ground, and they had to go through that passage. The 4 entered a dark place, but the green-haired young man led the way, carrying a torch. Meanwhile, the protagonist was further behind, trapped in a spider web. Tearing the strands off his face, he thought that place was filled with webs everywhere. Upon catching up with his companions, he felt that it had been a long time since anyone had used that place. Thus, the 4 warriors continued, led by the green-haired young man. However, some spiders were watching them from the ceiling as they walked. As he led the group, he walked with his torch lighting the way. At one point, he asked everyone to be careful. The protagonist also seemed to have noticed the same danger as him. One of the warriors, with 3 blue stripes on his head, nodded, signaling that they should be cautious. Above them, that spider was still eager to devour them. The protagonist quickly saw the creature and pointed upward, but the spider had already grabbed one of the warriors. Now the 3 below watched as that giant wolf spider devoured one of their companions. It swallowed that warrior almost entirely in one bite, and to aid digestion, it began producing acid. Rolf looked at it and realized it was starving. They had no chance to save their companion. With his eyes glowing blue, the protagonist warned the leader that there were more spiders. When he illuminated the ceiling with the torch, they noticed it was completely covered with them. The protagonist told himself to stay calm and figure out their weak point. He noticed that the creatures specialized in paralyzing poison and that their weakness was fire. With that, he decided to use his saga, Warrior's Sword. The green-haired young man was startled to see a sword suddenly appear in the protagonist's hand. Lee Tahoe threw that sword toward the ceiling with the intention of burning them. As soon as he launched it, all the spiders gathered in one spot, and he activated Single Fang. The sword quickly became a fire conductor, and an explosion was seen. With that, the protagonist and the others rushed to escape. He told them to run while they still had the chance. Meanwhile, the warrior with blue stripes on his head was worried about the sword, but everyone ran. Now, like a maze game, he guided everyone to escape the spiders. They reached a path that ended at a large door. The protagonist and the green-haired young man entered the door quickly and shouted for the other to move faster. As the bald warrior with some blue stripes passed through the door, one more member also ran to get in, but it was a giant spider. The scene was comical. There were 3 individuals, and the protagonist saw that one of the spiders had gotten in. While the protagonist dealt with that sneaky spider that managed to get inside, the other 2 tried to close the doors. With great effort, the 2 managed to shut the doors before those enormous spiders could also enter. Just as they struggled, the protagonist also had a hard time taking down that spider. Now the 2 holding the door were relieved they had managed to close it in time. With the protagonist soaked in sweat and exhausted, they asked him if this was the control room. Walking to the center of the room, they saw there was something right in the middle. The green-haired warrior realized that this place was, indeed, the emergency control room. Upon hearing it was the second control room, the protagonist understood why it had been so hard to reach it. Pulling something out of his clothes, the warrior prepared to activate that emergency room. He placed the item he pulled out into the panel and activated it, saying they should open the fortress gate to minimize casualties. After inserting the key, the emergency authorization was confirmed, and an intense light illuminated the 3 of them. From that light emerged a beautiful woman wearing tight black clothes with accentuated curves. The woman, dressed in very form-fitting clothes, welcomed them and said her name was Black Fortress. She asked them to issue a command, and both of them blushed, which the protagonist noticed immediately. With that, the green-haired warrior asked her to open the gate, and she replied that she understood. She immediately opened the doors to that room, and he screamed that it wasn't those doors, it was the fortress gates. He got so nervous that his face almost went blank, and the spiders nearly broke into that room as well. Now they thought they should just defend that place until the forces captured the fortress. The woman in black clothing warned that an intruder was approaching the control room. As she was warning everyone to prepare for battle, a creature kicked the door down. Lee Tahoe was shocked to see that creature break through such a thick iron door. The green-haired young man found it strange, since there was a horde of spiders outside, and he had wiped them all out. When the door was completely knocked down, they could see several spiders piled up outside. Now they were facing something they didn't even know if they had the strength to defeat. It was the boss Bloodstained Gaze, completely enraged. Opening his mouth, he roared that those rats shouldn't be there and that he would tear them into tiny pieces. Hearing that, the protagonist summoned another sword and thought of his Valkyrie, Hida. The 3 of them decided they wouldn't hide or run. The only chance was to face that wolf. It didn't take long for them to realize that the red-furred wolf was incredibly strong. He also had great skill with the weapon he wielded. In this case, it was a massive hammer that he used to easily deliver powerful blows against the warriors. He hurled one of the warriors against the wall with terrifying ease. Then he looked around, trying to figure out where the smaller warrior was, scanning in 2 directions. Meanwhile, the protagonist appeared from above, ready to deliver a powerful strike from the air. The intention was to catch the enemy off guard, but the wolf spotted him mid-air. The enemy threw his weapon aside while the protagonist was still descending. The enemy's plan was clear. He was going to catch the protagonist in the air and slam him into the ground. And that's exactly what he did. He jumped, caught the protagonist mid-air, and began descending slowly with him. Then he slammed the protagonist into the ground with full force. The enemy used an impact move called Stone Coffin. The green-haired warrior, seeing that, screamed for his friend. Meanwhile, the protagonist could only glance sideways toward where he was being called from. The green-haired warrior kept calling out to the protagonist, hoping he would respond. Meanwhile, he remained lying on the ground, staring blankly, as if looking into nowhere. In reality, the hero seemed to be floating in his own mind, feeling a warm and comforting sensation. He slowly opened his eyes and saw light. It was intense and radiant, and he wondered if that's what it felt like when someone passed from this world. But upon noticing the enemy's paw raised about to crush him, he realized it wasn't over yet, and that if he were stomped, he certainly wouldn't survive. Seeing the enemy's reaction, the green-haired warrior sharpened his gaze. With that, he activated the Saga Flaming Shot, which was essentially an arrow engulfed in flames. Furious, that soldier ordered the others to join him in protecting the protagonist. However, to the massive wolf, all those warriors looked like nothing but trash. He was sure he could defeat them easily, but for a moment he hesitated. That happened because he couldn't decide whether to finish off the one already on the ground or retaliate against the archer threatening him. For the giant wolf, it was hard to choose between crushing the one he had already captured or counterattacking. However, the warrior lying on the ground noticed that hesitation and decided to pretend he had already been defeated. That way, the wolf had no choice but to defend himself against the incoming arrow. So with a loud and arrogant voice, he told the green-haired warrior that he would be the next to fall. Rolf knew it wouldn't be easy to face that massive wolf, but he was already preparing to launch another attack. While the archer readied his arrows, the protagonist slowly rose from behind the wolf. At that moment, even the act of standing was painful. The pain was unbearable, but he hadn't been defeated yet, and he knew he had to give it everything to win this battle. So he charged toward the wolf, and since the creature was so huge, the hero went straight for its lower body. Rolf noticed when the hero dashed quickly between the giant wolf's legs. He also realized the wolf had lost a crucial part of his body. That creature, now smaller and defenseless, opened its mouth, trembling in pain and agony. It collapsed to the ground, writhing, screaming, and holding onto the part that had been ripped off. Both the green-haired hero and the bald warrior approached and stared at that wolf. With that, the green-haired warrior placed his hand on the hero's shoulder and said they should put an end to the creature's suffering. Meanwhile, the enemy boss, once so fierce, now lay on the ground in tears. The hero, preparing to unleash his saga warrior's sword, told the wolf that he was sorry. At that moment, the wolf was still trembling on the ground, holding what was left of its lower parts. As the hero prepared, even he was intimidated by the size of the hammer he managed to form. Still, he let the attack follow through with all his strength, delivering the strike called Skull Crusher. He raised the saga above the wolf's head and struck with all the energy he could muster. The attack hit squarely on the enemy's head, who was already motionless on the ground, just waiting for the end. The impact destroyed not only the wolf but also the surrounding area. The two warriors, the hero's companions, knew that the goddess was always close to him. Both raised their arms, paying reverence to the goddess Indu. While the two showed their gratitude, the protagonist felt excited because his synchronization had reached 7%. It was at that moment that the siege of Black Fortress came to an end, with victory for the warriors of Valhalla. Two warriors jumped on the hero, congratulating him for his feat. At the same time, the boss Frozen Mane had also been defeated by one of Thor's disciples. A warrior raised his arms and shouted in honor of the god Thor. He was satisfied, proudly displaying the head of the braided wolf as a trophy. Meanwhile, the black crow landed above, observing how the warriors' battle unfolded. There was something curious because Rosgride seemed more interested in the skinny warrior than in the strong ones. While the warriors celebrated, tossing the hero into the air in victory, he stood out for his great action in that battle. The warriors enjoyed the night with drinks offered by one of the Valkyries. They got even more excited when it was a drink provided by such a beautiful Valkyrie. While everyone celebrated, the hero found himself alone on top of the wall. With a cup in hand, he gazed at the stars. Hearing someone approaching, he looked toward the voice asking if his body was feeling any better. It was the green-haired warrior, and the protagonist replied that his body felt like it was about to break. As they talked, the commander arrived, asking if she could join them for a moment. She said that the contribution of the dispatch squad had been essential that day, so she offered them a drink. Rolf was emotional, saying that he had always wanted to drink with her, while the protagonist just watched his reaction. Their peaceful moment didn't last long because other warriors also wanted to drink with the captain. She, being kind, shared the drink with as many warriors as possible. Everyone raised their drinks and celebrated that victory, shouting in honor of Captain Sai. The protagonist, as always, preferred calmer and quieter celebrations. Watching from a distance, he thought he had always imagined the captain was a cold person. What he didn't expect was to see the green-haired warrior telling everyone about the battle against the spiders. Pointing at the protagonist, he said that it was him who had ripped off the lower parts of the supreme boss. The hero was surprised to see the captain's reaction. He never imagined that a woman could make that kind of expression. In the citadel of Black Fortress, torches were seen in the distance, while the warriors celebrated with visible enthusiasm. All the warriors held torches, laughing loudly as if free from any worries or urgent missions. One of them ran toward the bald warrior with blue stripes on his head, and the two clashed. They collided hard because that was the traditional party to decide who was the strongest. The celebration lasted late into the night, with loud music and lots of drinks, laughter, and teasing. They acted as if they were in a nightclub, completely carefree, dancing and playing around in a very relaxed way. The protagonist noticed some strange individuals among the other warriors, as if they were characters from another place. These guys were also drunk and wanted to have more fun, with fighting being the main choice. It was clear how much they enjoyed fighting each other, while the protagonist just watched the lively chaos. At that moment, a silver-haired Valkyrie caught the protagonist's attention with a mysterious and firm gaze. She said that he had a visitor, and another Valkyrie appeared behind her, causing obvious surprise in him. The warriors got excited about the situation, but he just widened his eyes since it was already nighttime. Hasrid, with an enigmatic look, commented about the little visit, while Hida just waved with a slight smile. The protagonist felt awkward, and the other warriors started laughing and making funny gestures at him. The protagonist and Hida quietly moved away to a more private spot, ignoring the teasing from the noisy warriors. Hasfred got irritated and ordered everyone to stop drinking and to stop making inappropriate assumptions. He pointed his finger and reminded everyone that Unit Siri had a mission in the morning and needed to rest immediately. Soon, the first rays of dawn began to appear, slowly lighting up the field where all the warriors were gathering. While yawning, the protagonist heard his friends commenting that he looked tired, as if he had been awake all night. Everyone stared at him curiously, waiting for some explanation about the Valkyrie's visit during the previous night. He said that something had indeed happened, but that he couldn't say anything more about it for now. However, a different necklace around his neck caught everyone's attention, and he refused to say a word about it. The captain called for silence and announced that it was time to reveal the plans for the new mission. She showed the map and explained that the location was to the east, in the old mines abandoned by the dwarves. As she spoke, a legion of wolves could be seen heading swiftly toward the dangerous underground mines. At the camp, the commander reported that ever since the attack, there had been no further news from the small dwarf warriors. The protagonist wanted to know if they were talking about the dwarves known for their remarkable strength. A green-haired warrior commented that dwarves loved beer, and maybe he could drink with them. He also said that dwarves were very manly, since even their women had long, impressive beards. The captain put her hand on her waist and said that the mine was really far from there. Even as the leader, she had trouble pronouncing the name of the transport that would be used for the mission. But then she announced they would be using the Black Lightning, which was already being prepared by authorized and experienced personnel. Everyone cheered at the news, even without knowing exactly what this mysterious Black Lightning was. The green-haired one, seeing the protagonist watching him, said he also had no idea what the transport was. He just remembered the previous night when the Valkyrie Heda asked him to keep everything they had discussed a secret. At the time, she raised her hands and said she wanted to give him something very important and special. The hero's heart raced, not knowing what she intended to give him, yet still curious. He felt relieved when he saw it was just a necklace of the legendary golden apple, sacred among the Valkyries. She also handed him a small brown pouch, saying it would boost his recovery in intense future combat. Upon opening it, he saw that it contained golden apple fragments, glowing and carefully wrapped in fine cloth. Heda still wanted to give him something more, so she came closer and gently brought her lips together. She gave him a kiss on the forehead and wished that the goddess's blessing would always be with him. The hero almost fainted from the emotion as he remembered this, but he soon returned to the present reality. At the current moment, they had been launched in coffins toward the battlefield, completely by surprise. The snow was broken by the protagonist's hand, who emerged from the thick icy layer feeling confused. He managed to get out completely and looked around, stunned to still be alive and intact. He saw behind him other coffins partially buried and hoped the warriors were also still alive. He knew they probably hadn't died, but they must be in a difficult state, almost out of strength. The golden apple necklace around his neck seemed to be the reason he was still conscious. Shortly after, they were all in front of the mine entrance, staring into the darkness that dominated the place. The protagonist found it odd that the door was open, suspecting it might be a well-set trap. The captain, with no other choice, ordered everyone to enter the mine, prepared for whatever might happen there. Beyond the gaping door, the inside was completely dark, reinforcing fears of what they might find. It was known that dwarves didn't like sunlight, but this level of darkness seemed excessive even for them. The protagonist even wondered if they might be vampires, but the captain announced their arrival firmly. Getting no response, she activated her saga and began scanning the surroundings carefully for signs of danger. They walked in total darkness, staying alert, while the protagonist examined the edges of the ceiling looking for anything. He spotted strange signs and warned Siri that several red names were glowing on the inner walls of the mine. He also warned that they were surrounded, indicating that danger was quickly closing in from all possible directions. Realizing the seriousness, the captain ordered them to immediately form defensive walls using the reinforced shields available. The warriors reacted promptly, joining their shields together to create barriers that blocked the first unexpected attack. A rain of arrows fell upon them, some so strong they pierced even the sturdy shield. Some warriors called for calm, trying to keep everyone steady as the arrow barrage continued relentlessly from above. The captain asked the protagonist if he could see the enemies through the gaps in their improvised defense. With one eye in position, he confirmed that yes, he could see and identify the enemies hidden in the dark. Focusing his gaze, he recognized the enemies as dwarves, but with a macabre appearance and red words written across them. He told everyone that they were zombie dwarves, something no one ever expected to find in there. The warriors were terrified, unable to understand why there were so many zombies or why they were dead dwarves. The protagonist concluded that probably all the dwarves had died and were then turned into dangerous zombies. The warrior Rolf asked the protagonist if he was sure those creatures were really zombies. Looking at the strange zombies with weird names, the hero said he was absolutely sure of it. The worst was yet to come, as the zombie dwarves were regrouping to launch another attack. The captain, noticing the enemy's strategy, ordered the warriors to pick up their reinforced shields again. Inserting their fingers into the shield grips, the warriors feared that it wouldn't be enough to block the attack properly. Everyone was nervous, thinking the next strike could be fatal, something impossible to survive. Looking upwards, they wondered if this might truly be the tragic end of everything. But to help them, several living dwarves were running in their direction with improvised weapons and bottles in hand. The dwarf leader shouted for his comrades to launch a preemptive strike against the zombies without wasting any more time. They quickly threw bottles filled with burning fuel to protect the warriors from that violent charge of undead enemies. Before tossing the bottles, they warned everyone to close their eyes because the light would be intense. After explosions, smoke, and blinding light, the warriors managed to escape alive from that terrifying siege in the dark mines. The dwarves guided them to an underground entrance, urging them to get inside quickly to protect themselves properly. The green-haired warrior complained that the space was way too tight to enter comfortably. A dwarf helped by pushing his head with his foot until he managed to squeeze through the passage. Everyone crawled into that tiny crevice, and the protagonist was the last one to cross the narrow hidden tunnel. Once on the other side, he was mesmerized by the crystals shining in every direction imaginable. It looked like a paradise of shimmering crystals, with colorful lights gently dancing across the surrounding rocks. The dwarf leader explained that all this chaos had been caused by a vampire that appeared in the middle of the night. The monster came out of nowhere, and on that same night, turned the dead dwarves into obedient zombies. He also said that if the warriors got bitten, they would also turn into mindless zombie creatures. He told them that only 20 dwarves were left alive, all hiding there, survivors of the recent bloody massacre. The captain asked them to describe the vampire in case it had any distinctive features they could recognize. The leader started describing the monster, gray-skinned, bald, with black eyes and a completely inhuman appearance. He said its nails would extend and retract like claws, breathing threats with every slow movement. The blue-haired captain asked Isaac if he intended to seek revenge against that cruel monster. Despite being told to wait, she closed her eyes and said they had to go back immediately to fight. The dwarves, gripping their weapons, said they needed to return urgently. There was something bigger than revenge. Isaac revealed that he had found a unit in the mine, something far too powerful to fall into the wrong hands. All the warriors seemed to understand what that meant, reacting with serious expressions and sharp, focused eyes. Only the protagonist stood silently among them, not understanding anything, just watching and trying to figure it out. His expression was one of boredom since no one was explaining clearly what that so-called unit was. It got even worse when he heard one warrior ask another if he knew what unit meant. After the explanation, the warriors were shocked because they didn't realize that unit was that important. Even so, the green-haired warrior still didn't fully understand and asked for a more detailed explanation. It was then explained that the unit stone was known among the ancients as the metal of the gods. As they walked, they concluded that such a dangerous weapon could never be allowed to fall into enemy hands. While walking, Isaac told everyone to stop because they had finally arrived at the target location of the mission. They stood before a strange building, and Isaac explained that the sacred anvil was on the top floor. He said that on that same floor were the vampire and the unit, guarded by deadly traps and zombies. He also explained that the top floor had access to the surface and that its roof could be opened easily. The protagonist considered this information valuable, thinking it could be useful later during a fight against that terrible vampire. The doors were opened, and everyone went inside, ready to complete the mission without hesitation or retreat. The leader announced that they would launch an immediate frontal assault to give the enemies no chance to react first. Inside, zombies were calmly playing cards and drinking, ignoring the presence of the intruders in that hall full of tables. In a matter of seconds, all the undead stood up armed, ready to start a new and brutal battle. Now it would be a fight between the living and the dead, an epic confrontation full of growing tension. The protagonist, the leader, and the green-haired warrior were ready to face that zombie horde. Soon, the Vanguard Shield team was called, responsible for holding back the first wave of enemies. They appeared attacking with force, throwing shields at the zombies' heads, creating openings for the other warriors. The captain then called the dwarf warriors, who started spinning, creating deadly whirlwinds of cutting wind. With that, several zombies were instantly defeated, allowing the living fighters to advance safely on the field. Seeing that the field was under control, the leader urgently called the protagonist to step in with strategic priority. Isaac led the rear with archers, launching a rain of arrows onto the moving zombies. He apologized to his former comrades, now dead, but said he had to deliver justice in that decisive and dangerous moment. Without hesitation, he ordered flaming arrows against the zombies to clear the way for the warriors inside the tower. Now in front of a metal door, the warriors were carefully planning how they would proceed upon entering. As they slightly opened the door, they saw the sacred anvil with a golden box placed right on top of it. Isaac went in first, determined to make the vampire pay for everything he had done before. From a distance, they saw a unit resting, while the protagonist asked where exactly the vampire was hiding. They quickly realized he was on the ceiling, and the hero pointed upward with a quick gesture. The vampire was watching everyone from above, hanging like a grotesque creature and covered in strange dark tattoos. The green-haired warrior gave the order to attack with arrows and maintain constant, immediate vigilance. The protagonist noticed that this vampire was much larger than any other enemy they had faced before. That sinister being with a violet aura was clearly the final boss, the ultimate enemy of that risky journey. They prepared arrows to shoot, aiming precisely at the monster hanging from the ceiling of that silent room. In seconds, they were all hit by something so fast they could barely see the attack clearly. Those who weren't hit managed to witness what happened and were left with their eyes wide open in shock. It was the protagonist who noticed the vampire's approach as he placed his claws on his neck. Now the hero was face to face with the terrifying enemy who had appeared unexpectedly in that forgotten dark tower. The vampire placed his sharp claws on the protagonist's neck and ordered him not to move. He declared that not only that warrior, but everyone else should remain completely still in his presence. Meanwhile, the captain asked the green-haired warrior if he could still endure his injuries. The archer replied that he was fine, but it would be difficult to use the bow with his arm like that. When the vampire heard the archer suggest he had been spared, he immediately confirmed that it was intentional. He already imagined how all of them would look after being fully transformed into warrior zombies loyal to his will. The protagonist hated that thought, thinking it would be better to face that monster now than to surrender. At that moment, someone threw something against the vampire's back, and he caught the object quickly. Holding the arrow firmly, he declared that none of them had enough strength to defeat him. The arrow had been fired by the captain, who was still holding her bow with a serious and determined expression. Isaac also shouted that he would rather die than become a slave to a monster like that vampire. He launched a blazing flame toward the enemy, swearing to fight until the end with courage. The vampire, even engulfed in flames, didn't seem to suffer and even smiled, finding the situation amusing. He laughed loudly, mocking how pathetic those humans were with their simple tricks and desperate attack. He asked if they were done with their useless illusions because now he was going to act seriously. The captain ordered the shield barrier warriors to protect Isaac and prepare for the attack. Immediately, the warriors charged toward the vampire, ready to face him with all their strength. However, they were violently thrown back, as the vampire was absurdly strong and far too fast. With the warriors thrown aside, the dwarves initiated their trio attack called Iron Whirlwind. They hoped to deal some damage to the vampire, who remained standing, laughing as if he found it entertaining. He said that attack only tickled, but the dwarves had much more important plans in mind. They only wanted to lure the enemy exactly to the point of the trap prepared with great strategy. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already positioned to pull the lever at the right moment in the battle. He knew that once he pulled it, sunlight would hit the vampire directly in the middle of the arena. When the sun finally touched his skin, the vampire began to scream and release pink-colored energy. The hero quickly broke the lever, preventing the vampire from reversing the solar trap's mechanism. With a piece of the lever in hand, he watched the monster writhe under the intense sunlight. The enemy fell to his knees, and dense, dark smoke, like ashes, poured out from his body. Dwarves and warriors quickly gathered to see how the vampire would react to the purifying light. The green-haired archer asked the hero if he really knew how to defeat a vampire. The protagonist said they could either beat him up now or just wait for the sun to do its job. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he realized the vampire was chanting words in an ancient language. He noticed the vampire was whispering the spell while bringing his hands to his mouth as if praying. The archer looked up at the sky, saw the clouds closing in, and thought a storm was coming. The dwarves understood it was urgent to hit the vampire hard before he could fully recover. But a cloud of bats flew into the place, blocking the sun and its holy purifying light. The spell was actually used to summon others of his kind, empowering the boss again with shadows. Now the vampire was fully restored and ready to attack all the warriors with full strength and fury. He knew he couldn't hesitate. He wanted to eliminate his enemies before they could reorganize on the battlefield. Gar noticed something shining on the vampire's body and realized he was preparing a new devastating attack. And indeed, the vampire spat a green, scorching fireball at the nearest warriors. One of them tried to resist but was hit directly, turning into nothing more than a burned and shattered skeleton. Now warriors and dwarves were running desperately from side to side, fleeing from the green flames of hell. The vampire roared in fury, demanding that everyone stand still so he could wipe them out with a single strike. The green-haired archer shouted that there was barely enough space left to escape from so much fire. It was then that the hero had an idea. He couldn't let this scene end like this. He launched himself against the vampire, who was watching from above and thought that human was foolish and useless. The protagonist dodged the acid being thrown at him and moved steadily closer, aiming for the enemy's back. At one point, he jumped onto the vampire's back, trying to find an opening to strike hard. The vampire realized that the images of the hero in front of him were just illusions meant to distract him. He understood that the real one was on his back, perfectly positioned and ready for a decisive attack. However, the protagonist hesitated because he couldn't find a safe opening to deliver a precise blow. The vampire turned his head and asked what kind of sword the hero was carrying with such care. Now on the monster's back, the hero didn't have many options. It was a risky position. The vampire twisted and squirmed, trying to shake the human off, violently swinging his body with growing rage. He screamed, asking what that worm thought he was doing stuck to his back. The hero replied that even if he wanted to, there was no way to safely get down from that height. The vampire then suggested an idea. He would slowly descend and gently place the hero on the ground. The protagonist naively accepted the offer, trusting that the enemy wouldn't deceive him in such a tense moment. The vampire flapped his wings, thinking that human was truly foolish and easy to manipulate. But as he flew, preparing to throw him to the ground, he felt a powerful energy emerging from the hero's body. He turned, curious, asking what was going on, as he felt something strange surrounding them both at that moment. An intense blue light began to radiate from the protagonist, enveloping the vampire in a blinding glow as well. All the hero's allies looked up, surprised by the scene unfolding before their eyes. The protagonist had gained a new saga midair, and the enemy realized something was wrong. Because of that, the giant bat started flapping its wings wildly to disrupt the protagonist. The hero's joy was immense upon realizing he had unlocked the Dragon Knight ability. Now he would be able to ride flying creatures from griffins to dragons, so he used that saga on the bat and managed to tame the beast. This caused the great vampire to turn into a soft, fluffy little bat. Even Isaac, who was his arch-enemy, found the creature adorable. To prove he had tamed the bat, he asked it to descend calmly, leaving everyone impressed. Half shocked, the green-haired archer asked what they were supposed to do with that creature now. Isaac had an idea, so everyone approached the big soft bat and started petting it. Meanwhile, from a distance, Captain Siri was observing. Even for her, it was hard to resist the cuteness of the little bat's eyes. She reached out her hand toward the creature to pet it. Seeing that the animal was calm, she completed the gesture by gently stroking the tiny bat's soft cheeks. However, the excess affection made the creature lose control and start acting aggressively. The great vampire Astragos was reacting to the hero's saga. Transforming back into the evil vampire, he questioned how such insignificant creatures dared to touch him. The indignation of the wicked being was so great that he threatened to chew them up and swallow them. At that moment, the warriors realized they needed to prepare for battle. The hero knew his saga wasn't complete yet because there was a time limit to control a being. But he had an idea of what to do, so he jumped once again onto the vampire's neck. Despite the incomplete saga, the vampire had no choice but to obey the human's commands. Now mounted on the bat, the protagonist looked down and noticed that all the warriors were trusting him, so he pointed upward and ordered the bat to fly as high as possible. Upon receiving the order, Astragos obeyed, flying as high as he could. He flew so high that he left that place, reaching the clouds and being hit by sunlight. Meanwhile, the next command was given. He should dive straight toward the ground. Once again, Astragos obeyed, as the hero's saga forced him to do so. After the bat dived toward the ground, the hero activated the warrior's sword saga, and with it he managed to summon the mighty Skull Crusher hammer. Then he struck the bat as many times as he could. The hero, after repeating the attack several times, found himself exhausted. Even so, he noticed that the vampire was still alive. He saw when someone asked him to move aside. It was the dwarf Isaac. That man had great appreciation for fire and incendiary weapons. Keeping that in mind, the protagonist tried to get as far away as he could. Even so, he was caught by the explosion, which threw him far away. While lying on the ground, he noticed that people were running toward the vampire with more fuel. After some time, the green-haired archer asked the protagonist if the vampire had been eliminated. To answer, the hero decided to activate his eyes and noticed that Astragos was no longer active. Now it was safe for everyone to approach the center and the sacred anvil. Isaac was the first to approach since he would open the box and check the unit. Upon opening the box, he was excited about what he saw, but the others didn't share the same reaction. When Isaac grabbed the unit in his hand, everyone noticed it was a very small piece. The green-haired archer concluded that such a tiny piece didn't seem that important. Upon hearing that, Isaac became furious and shouted that it was enough to make a ring. As a precaution, he closed the box again, still keeping a serious expression. He knew that keeping the unit in that situation would be dangerous, so he handed it to the captain. He said he regretted not being able to forge it, but the group's situation was precarious, and they wouldn't be able to protect the material. The The captain, holding the box, affirmed that she understood and would ensure it was properly delivered. Hearing the captain's words, Isaac was satisfied and called the green-haired archer to go have a drink. That invitation pleased the warriors, who became very excited. However, the excitement didn't last long. The captain shut down any possibility. She warned that they should return immediately and said her goodbyes to Isaac. However, the dwarf didn't want to be indebted to the warriors, so he had an idea. Very excited, he asked everyone to follow him for a moment. After that, they arrived at a place and Isaac opened the doors. The warriors seemed even more pleased, and at that moment, even the hero was happy. He was standing before the legendary dwarven arsenal. The warriors looked like children in a store full of toys. They were amazed as if they were collectors standing before the masterpiece of their lives. But the protagonist only observed for a moment until Isaac asked him to choose something. Since that was the case, he began to look around carefully, activating his eyes that could see everything. As soon as he activated them, he started analyzing the weapons, for his dragon eyes allowed him to see magical weapons. Upon examining them, he realized he could even see their classifications. When he saw one with a different glow, he didn't hesitate and chose it immediately. After the brief visit to the arsenal, they were already outside and ready to leave. The warriors said their goodbyes to their dwarf brothers and wanted to thank them from the bottom of their hearts. Isaac had a comment to make to the protagonist. He said that he had excellent eyes for equipment. He told him that he had picked the falcon wingsuit. The protagonist wanted to know if it had any special ability. Isaac explained that it would be necessary to chant to use it, but he promised to teach him quickly. After that, a falcon was seen soaring through the skies. That was the protagonist with his blue eyes, screaming with his falcon beak that this was amazing. After chanting, he managed to fly through the skies, just like the other falcons. He could now fly with his wings, while the others were thrown back into the coffins. After the trip, they were already back in the city called Black Fortress, where they would rest for a while. In the city's office, they were reporting everything that had happened to the Valkyrie. Now the Valkyrie was holding the golden box that contained the unit entrusted by the dwarves during the mission. With the small unit in her hands, she said that the fallen warriors would be reborn as warriors of steel. She stated that she would take care of the procedures and that they were dismissed, now free to return to their well-deserved rest. Soon after, the leader, the protagonist, and the green-haired archer were walking together down a corridor. The archer couldn't go a single day without drinking and immediately invited the protagonist to join him. Meanwhile, the leader praised the warrior, saying he was of great importance to the success they had achieved. The protagonist replied shyly that without everyone's support, he never would have been able to contribute anything. The archer kept insisting, trying to convince the protagonist to have a cold one with him, as cheerful as always. The protagonist, however, stayed behind watching the two, thoughtful and reflecting on the recent events they had faced. He remembered that Astragos was extremely powerful, capable of summoning bats and taking on a threatening, unusual transformation. With a blue light in his hand, he thought about the runes he had obtained by defeating him earlier. His synchronization rate was at 9%, and he wondered what he would be able to do once he reached 10%. In another region, a golden-haired Valkyrie was carefully scouting the icy, mountainous areas. That was Regin Leaf, who had gone very far but felt she needed to return for some reason. However, something caught her attention. A giant, furry paw appeared between the nearby rocks and snow. Observing more closely, she heard and saw signs of tremors coming from some unknown and threatening movement. She hesitated, unsure if she should get closer or just leave and report what she had seen. When she clearly saw something, her green eyes widened, and a drop of sweat slid down silently. Faced with the revelation, she used the swan wing cloak and quickly transformed into a goose. She knew that getting any closer would be risky, but she needed to report the discovery as quickly as possible. Upon receiving the news that an army was approaching, the Valkyrie was completely overtaken by sudden concern. Reskrid understood that, at that speed, the battle would begin by noon the next day. The situation was serious, and Ciri ordered everyone to sleep early, avoiding any excesses or unnecessary distractions at that moment. She also banned alcohol, making it clear that they would face a decisive battle as soon as dawn arrived. Looking around, she noticed the absence of the protagonist and didn't know exactly where he was at that moment. The protagonist was in an empty place, looking around and realizing that there was no one else nearby. He wanted to take the opportunity to train with the cloak and fully master how it worked. He intended to practice as much as possible before the next day's battle, wasting no useful opportunity. The night passed quickly, and the new day arrived, bringing tension and preparations inside the Valkyrie's hall. The Valkyrie Ingrid announced that she had gathered 500 lower-level warriors ready to defend their city. Meanwhile, the scouting Valkyrie reported that the enemies numbered more than 6,000. Knowing this, the three Valkyries decided that they should go to war, for Asgard and for the Nine Realms. Meanwhile, the furry enemies could already see the warriors' city, and the confrontation was quickly approaching. The warriors were ready for battle, gathered with courage and determination to protect the remaining sacred territory. A group led by Brachi, from Thor's Legion, shouted that they would achieve victory with absolute honor. Captain Siri from Uller's Legion, was also determined to secure victory in the name of her own. The protagonist knew he would need a long-range weapon, so he chose the thunder crossbow. Prepared for war, he shouted that it was for Idun, while thinking it was for Haida too. The battle unfolded both in the air and on the ground, with troops engaged in every direction possible. A rain of arrows was fired at the enemies, trying to stop their advance with precise and coordinated force. The enemies, however, protected themselves with strong shields, getting hit gradually but advancing with impressive speed. They threw ropes over the walls and managed to climb them, even under heavy attacks from the warriors who stood firm. The defenders threw water and rocks at the invaders, trying to stop the climb with everything they had available. Some enemies fell, but others persisted, determined to reach the top and break through the previously established defense. The turmoil increased, with soldiers trying to climb, while others fought desperately to stop them by any means necessary. The enemy advanced on large scale, and the defenders responded with fury to contain that threatening surge. Disorder took over the battlefield, turning the scene into chaos and widespread confusion among the warriors. The green-haired archer fired flaming arrows, trying to halt the enemy's advance with his blazing power. On the ground, the protagonist also fought with everything he had, struggling to hold back the enemies with sweat and determined skill. At a certain moment, he looked up and saw something massive flying over the skies, casting a shadow and causing immediate tension. He realized that the aerial war was also evolving rapidly, and he knew he had to take action now. He observed warriors riding mounts advancing. They were wyverns, creatures that frequently unleashed destructive fire blasts. The golden-haired Valkyrie raised her hand, using sacred runes to create a special protective barrier. Even so, the attacks were intense, and the barrier's durability seemed insufficient to hold everything for long. The protagonist heard the Valkyrie say they needed to eliminate the enemies in the sky immediately. Without any hesitation, he reached into his cloak, determined to act and make a difference in that critical moment of the aerial battle. Captain Siri and the archer saw when the protagonist ran with clear determination on his face. He ran while thinking that this was his moment to prove his worth and protect all his allies. As he launched himself into the air, he relied only on the falcon wingsuit and began to chant. As soon as he chanted the magic words, his body started glowing and violently reacting to the transformation. In moments, his hands turned into wings, while his face became covered with feathers like a mystical creature. Now he flew through the skies like a true mystical bird, gliding on the wind with precision and speed. In that winged form, he looked down and noticed that no one had realized his unexpected transformation. It was the perfect moment to show the results of the intense training he had done overnight. Inside, he was fierce like a predator, determined to fly over the enemies with relentless resolve. With that, he closed his wings and dove in a swift dive toward his target. He was warning the knight mounted on the dragon that he now faced an unexpected and formidable enemy. He recited the magic words again, and his claws slowly began to transform into powerful legs. With his legs fully formed, he delivered a monstrous kick that knocked the knight off his mount. Now the soldier was falling in free fall, while the hero took control of the winged beast. Thanks to the saga, piloting the wyvern became an easy task, almost instinctive for the warrior. When he activated the saga, the one who rides dragons, the beast became submissive, almost tame and obedient. He also activated the warrior's sword saga, as he needed to summon a weapon to fight. He was disappointed to receive only a bamboo spear instead of a metallic lance. With no other choice, he accepted the improvised spear, spoke to the wyvern, and prepared for the next attack. The beast unleashed fire blasts, while he defended the strikes with his bamboo spear. It took some time until the others noticed that there was a wolf hidden among the lambs. Meanwhile, he was taking down the other flying knights one by one, supporting his allies in the battle. When the enemies realized the betrayal, they all started attacking him fiercely with elemental and physical powers. But he was already ready for an equivalent counterattack, striking back without hesitation against the incoming assaults. He wanted to prove that the knight training had paid off, even against so many enemies simultaneously. With a tense expression and wielding the spear, he projected magical energy to destroy all the enemies present. Down below, everyone was shouting in celebration for the warrior of Idun, moved by his aerial performance. As several enemy mounts fell, the warriors on the ground praised his strength and tactical skill. The scene was so impactful that even the Valkyries, watching everything, were visibly impressed with him. They realized that he had eliminated an entire wyvern unit alone, without needing any external assistance. One of the Valkyries shouted that there were still more enemies coming directly toward the warrior. Now harpies with female bodies and monstrous wings were flying menacingly to attack him in coordinated formation. Upon seeing so many harpies gathered, he gritted his teeth, knowing it was impossible to take them all down alone. So he decided to descend with his mount, seeking support among the ground allies still fighting. As he approached the ground, he shouted Captain Siri's name, hoping to receive a tactical order. The captain, upon seeing the warrior, tried to think of something useful to reverse the emergency situation. Mounted, the warrior extended his hand toward the captain, who was preparing to jump. She leaped into the air and caught his hand, being pulled onto the mount alongside the hero. Now the two were flying together, mounted on the creature controlled by the hero's powerful ancestral saga. It was the captain's turn to unleash her saga, sorcerer's arrows that never missed. She fired dozens of arrows at once, each one finding its target with deadly precision. Each arrow sought out a harpy, hitting them individually with mastery, magic, and overwhelming power combined. In a short time, all of them had been struck, falling helplessly, to the delight of the allies on the ground. The Valkyries were also satisfied with the warrior's help, recognizing his value and courage. Suddenly, a gigantic flame was launched against the warriors, terrifying all the fighters nearby. The blast was so powerful that no one was quite sure where it was coming from. Even the protagonist and the captain were visibly frightened by the unexpected explosion. The hero asked the captain what had happened, saying it felt like the sky had fallen. As they looked more closely, they realized it was a giant, the infamous Black Lightning in Fury. Flames, destruction, and blazing light came from the colossal being, whose power caused tremors across the entire field. Its gigantic blue eye radiated terror, almost hypnotic, like a magical storm trapped inside a globe. With enormous hands, the giant held a rope while his steps crushed everything beneath his feet. The protagonist widened his eyes, immediately recognizing the feared giant boss, Cut. All the warriors were in shock upon seeing him advancing, with his threatening size and demonic expression. The giant boss's gaze instilled terror, staring down at the warriors with overwhelming hostility. With white hair, horns, and terrifying fangs, the enemy looked like a demon descending straight from the heavens. The protagonist looked at the captain, realizing they needed to retreat quickly to avoid more casualties. Meanwhile, the giant lifted enormous boulders and hurled them against a shield maintained by a Valkyrie. She cried out to the sovereign Odin, begging for permission to use the sacred ancestral power of the runes. Even so, the giant continued smashing the barrier with overwhelming force, trying to shatter the protection. Some soldiers were struck amidst the chaos, thrown like ragdolls against the ground. The golden-haired Valkyrie struggled to maintain the barrier, fighting against exhaustion and fear. The enemy's relentless attacks made the defense increasingly fragile against that colossal force. The giant's rage was visible, with eyes glowing blue, charged with almost divine energy. The Valkyrie clenched her teeth, trying to find inner strength to sustain the barrier for just a few more seconds. But the cracks were spreading rapidly, indicating that destruction was only a matter of time. The Valkyries screamed in desperation, realizing they needed to restore the barrier before it was too late. The Valkyrie named Grid feared they didn't have enough power to defeat such a powerful enemy. Knowing this, she wished to unleash the true power of the Valkyries before everything was completely destroyed. With that, the Valkyries screamed to Odin, saying they were not prepared. The sight of that giant, repeatedly slamming a massive boulder against the barrier, was agonizing. The Valkyries noticed that with each strike, the barrier deteriorated even further. It was clear that they were all at their limit, and the barrier was becoming increasingly unstable. With that, the Valkyrie Razgrid shouted, begging for permission to break the seal. She looked upward and saw the raven flying above the giant, seeking consent to use their powers. The raven continued flying in circles, flapping its wings more intensely with each pass. Its eyes glowed an intense red, and it opened its beak. With that, it refused to release the Valkyries to use their maximum powers. That hit the three like a bombshell, as they desperately needed to activate their powers immediately. Even with the giant's terrifying presence and the relentless boulder attacks, the raven declared this was merely a test. The red-eyed raven affirmed that Valhalla needed powerful warriors. This caught the three Valkyries completely by surprise, and they all looked around in shock. Doing so, they noticed great heroes, warriors willing to sacrifice their lives for the gods. Everywhere they looked, there were strong warriors determined to grow at any cost. Even faced with such overwhelming danger, none of them showed fear or any intention of retreat. One of them prepared himself and leaped into the air to attack the giant. Despite being small, the warrior didn't care about his size, even when facing a beastly being. The warrior was driven by an enormous will to win, and so he attacked with his weapon. He managed to strike the giant's head, causing a small wound. That motivated the other warriors to attack as well, and everyone charged forward, shouting for their gods. The initial strike from that small warrior managed to pierce the giant's thick skin between the eyes. Even though the giant flung that warrior away with ease, the wound remained. With that, the protagonist arrived, set the captain down on the ground as she requested, and asked what the next orders were. She ordered him to fly and attack, taking advantage of the opening created when the arm struck the giant. With that, the protagonist looked in that direction, searching for where exactly that weak point was. Soon after, he managed to spot a small scratch on the forehead, right between the eyes. That was enough for him to observe the weak point more carefully. The tear in the giant's skin seemed like something worth exploiting at that moment. He told his mount that it was now their turn. Still on the ground, the captain shouted to Rolf to move forward with the siege ballista. Two would activate two sagas at the same time. The green-haired archer looked at the captain, half in disbelief that they had decided to activate both at once. In the sky, the protagonist was already very close to the giant and asked his mount to be careful. Now he was observing the best way to approach the giant without being annihilated. No matter how much he looked at that giant, he couldn't see the right or proper moment to act. Then the giant seemed to have noticed the protagonist and tried to grab him. It opened its hand toward the protagonist, who now widened his eyes. Seeing that nothing had happened, he had time to turn his neck and look behind to see what was going on. And with that, he saw a cloud of smoke heading toward the giant, realizing someone had saved him. Even so, his mount was shattered, and with that, the protagonist fell. He was very close to the ground and touched it a few times before finally crashing. Dust covered the trail left by the protagonist. Valkyries were screaming for the warrior of Idun, completely worried. Eskrid even widened her big blue eyes and gritted her teeth. She even left the barrier, just like the others, and ran toward the warrior. As she ran, she shouted that she was leaving the shield with the Valkyrie sisters and needed to help that warrior. Approaching the protagonist, she yelled that he was their only hope while he sat in the middle of the dust. When he opened his eyes, he could hardly believe he was still alive. Although he was gravely injured, everyone was looking from a distance toward where he had been thrown. In his thoughts, he imagined he should get up, but he didn't have the strength to do it. At that moment, a large concentration of enemies gathered to try to hit him and eliminate him once and for all. Even so, he just kept smiling because he was very sleepy. He thought he would really die at that moment and recall the distant memory. Someone was calling him, wearing glasses and with a raised eyebrow. He drifted back into memories of when he had a home and a life with his Valkyrie Hida. It was a recurring daydream, the apartment of newlyweds, his safe memory to which he always returned. In his imagination, the redhead said that he should somehow fight back. She fed him, asking him to open his mouth, and when he did, she said he was a good boy. He himself closed his mouth, holding it with his hand. Soon the Valkyrie Raskrid, who was approaching, noticed an intense light shining in that direction. She knew that light came from the divine. She didn't know that a mere lower-class warrior could possess the power of the goddess. Meanwhile, he seemed to be slowly getting up, regenerating. That intense light shocked even his enemies. The protagonist looked at his own hands and said that his wounds were completely healed. With furious eyes, he looked toward a certain spot. With that, he saw that all his enemies were ready to annihilate him. They charged and jumped on him all at once. Right after, arrows of light radiated among the bodies. All those enemies were thrown away with just one punch from the protagonist. Now, with his hand raised, he said that it was all because of Hida and Idun. From above, the captain and the green-haired archer asked if he was okay, and he said yes. Both shouted that they were ready and could handle the duel saga. Now the protagonist said that he didn't have a mount and didn't know what he would do. Eskrid approached, saying he didn't need to worry, that he could ride her. When she said that and got closer, he blushed and wanted her to explain what was going on. Meanwhile, all the warriors seemed furious and were desperately trying to stop the monster from breaking the barrier. The barrier was increasingly cracking as the giant insisted on destroying it. From afar, the giant, with all those warriors clinging to its fur, looked like it was covered in small flies. All the warriors were doing whatever they could, biting and attacking with their weapons, but before the giant, they seemed insignificant. Over and over again, the giant simply threw them away with a simple wave of its hand. As the warriors were tossed like flies, the protagonist was still blushing at the idea of riding the Valkyrie. She merely spoke the magic word, and a reaction began to unfold. A great blue light started intensifying in front of the protagonist. The Valkyrie Raskrid transformed into a great white dragon. She said that now she understood why Odin had forbidden them from directly intervening. Looking at the protagonist, she said that he was strong, much stronger than she had thought. She also looked at the warrior Ciri and at the green-haired archer. They were great warriors of Odin, but she knew that the final battle would not be theirs, no matter how much they ran and tried their best. The conquest and victory had to belong to the protagonist because everything was in his hands. The Valkyrie, in the form of a white ice dragon, asked the warrior to climb onto her back. Meanwhile, the other warriors were keeping the giant occupied. Carefully and politely asking permission, the warrior climbed onto the back of the great dragon. From above, it was now possible to see where the barrier was formed, and higher up, the dragoness flew. Right from the start, the protagonist thought she was incredibly strong and flew with astonishing speed. Below, Captain Ciri and the green-haired archer watched the dragoness soaring through the skies. With that, the captain gave the order for Rolf to do what was necessary at that moment. He positioned himself behind her, holding onto her shoulders as they were about to use their sagas together. In this way, both unleashed their sagas simultaneously. While the beasts snarled and tried to take over the area, the warrior from Thor's legion shouted that he would attack using his saga. He was called the son of a god, and with a fierce look and gripping his weapon, he charged with everything he had. In another scene, the archer and Captain Ciri activated their sagas, Witch's Arrow and Hunter's Arrow, At the same time, flying toward the great giant were the Valkyrie in dragon form and the protagonist. They could see from a distance the moment when the warrior from Thor's legion charged the giant to inflict damage. In the exact same instant, the arrows from Captain Siri and the archer also flew toward the giant with the same goal. The giant monster felt the damage the moment the warrior threw his weapon at him. The arrows had been precise, just as the saga's name suggested, and now the giant was in serious trouble. With his face in flames, he quickly lost balance and crashed to the ground from the warrior's impact. That was the perfect moment for the warrior from Idun's legion to finish him with a single blow. With that idea in mind, the protagonist's eyes lit up with the flames of courage. Knowing he had to be precise, he activated his saga. The charge of a warrior was like a storm, and with that, a whirlwind was formed. It struck the fallen giant directly, giving him no chance to stand back up. In this way, the giant, now too weak to rise, was continuously attacked, while the whirlwind did its job magnificently. After some time, the dust settled, revealing only the defeated giant lying on the ground. With the enemy defeated, there was now a grand hall full of joyful warriors, drinking and eating. Taking advantage of the celebration, the Valkyrie arrived to greet them and deliver a speech. Raising her horn-shaped mug, she asked all the warriors to raise their tankards. She toasted and honored their courage, saying it was a joy to be among them that day. All the warriors cheered for the health of Valkyrie Regenleaf. She apologized for not being able to fill everyone's tankards, but said they shouldn't toast only once that night. Therefore, she left it to her sister, the Ice Princess Razgrid, the mission of filling the tankards of the two who stood out the most. Sometimes, Razgrid held the jug with an angry face because she hated being called the Ice Princess. She brought her hand to her mouth and coughed to get everyone's attention while holding the jug. She announced that she would call out the awardees, staring intently at all the warriors. First, she called the warrior from Thor's legion Brachi. He stood up and brought his tankard to the Valkyrie, while the warriors shouted that he was an incredible warrior. Next was the warrior from Idun's legion, and the protagonist stood up. At that moment, all the warriors went wild, shouting that he was the warrior who had received a visit from a Valkyrie. And when Razgrid heard that he had also ridden a Valkyrie, she got mad. The colorful-haired Valkyrie announced that with this achievement, both were being promoted to lower-class warriors. The protagonist could hardly believe that he was now a warrior of a higher rank. He was now on the same level as his friend Bjorn. He stood on stage together with the warrior from Thor's legion and the three Valkyries. The golden-haired Valkyrie raised her mug and shouted that everyone should drink to their heart's content. The warriors also raised their tankards, declaring that they should celebrate the victory of that day together. Thus, the warrior from Thor's legion and the warrior from Idun's legion clinked their tankards. The protagonist was so satisfied that he could hardly believe it. He even felt embarrassed in front of so many warriors shouting, thinking that all of this was just too good to be true. As they shouted for him to chug his entire tankard in one go, he quickly complied with their wish. Now everyone shouted that he was a real man. Satisfied, they tossed him into the air while someone watched from afar. A strange figure was talking to a Valkyrie, observing the warrior closely. The man found the young one interesting but said that any one of his boys could have done the same. With the Valkyrie's silence, the scar-faced man figured he should give it a chance. And since she had asked, he thought maybe he could help, just this once. Then he moved and left the place, while everyone in the scene was celebrating the victory with food and drinks. It had already been a week since the great battle, and in the lower-class warriors' quarters, the protagonist was lying in bed, taking a good nap. The boy was drooling from how peaceful he was. Something startled him so much that it made him throw his blanket far away. He ran to the door, screaming because he felt a strange presence. When he opened the door, he came face to face with a hooded man, from whom various lightning-like powers emanated. The man simply stared at the protagonist, who was sweating as he observed that mysterious figure. The protagonist wondered why so many bolts of lightning were falling only around that man. The stranger looked at the protagonist and asked if he was the lower-class warrior Lee Tahoe. He said he had heard that he had defeated 2 commander-level gnolls. Placing his hand on the cape, about to remove it, he commented that this man had also fought a giant. As he completely removed the cape, he found it strange that they were treating him like a hero. Stabbing his sword into the ground, he made it clear that he was there to face him. The protagonist activated his eyes and realized that this guy was absolutely strong. He believed that, at the very least, he was as powerful as a Valkyrie, or perhaps even more. That man, with black and white hair and a scar on his face, seemed to be waiting for a duel with the protagonist. The hero was startled to hear the man say he wanted to duel, questioning why he had shown up so suddenly. He also said he didn't want to fight without a reason, but as he placed his hand on his face, he stated that he would find one. Then he looked at the protagonist with fierce eyes and said he didn't need a reason. The protagonist, upon hearing those words, was already sweating. Now that the mysterious warrior Ragnar had suddenly appeared, the protagonist was trying to find a way out of that situation. The protagonist realized there was no way to escape, so he summoned his sword. Now he stood before his opponent with his sword summoned, prepared for a possible direct fight. The hero reached for his saga called The Charge of a Warrior is Like a Storm. However, the opponent simply blocked that saga as if it were something of no apparent importance. This caused even more irritation to the protagonist, who shouted furiously as he tried to attack again. And just like before, the opponent merely blocked while keeping a calm and confident face. This way, the two continued fighting while the opponent controlled the battle with calm and patience. At a certain point, the protagonist started wondering if he was facing some hidden defense hack. For that reason, he thought that if that were the case, he would aim directly at his back. Following that thought, he decided to put his plan into action and attack the enemy from behind. However, the attempt failed because his enemy was much faster than him. He received a powerful kick that shattered several trees as he was violently thrown backwards. He felt a sharp pain as he crashed into the last tree, where his body finally stopped. Meanwhile, the challenger watched the protagonist lying against the trunk of that enormous tree. Coughing and trembling, he couldn't understand how he hadn't managed to cause even a scratch. He knew that without the blessing granted by the goddess, he wouldn't have survived that terrible direct impact. The hero didn't want to end up like the defeated warriors who became eternal steel warriors. The opponent raised his sword, and with a piercing gaze, said not to be disappointed if he died. He launched several attacks toward the hero, clearly intending to slice him to pieces right there. However, he was startled because, suddenly, he noticed something extremely strange happening before his eyes. Out of nowhere, the protagonist began to fly after putting on his cloak and chanting a spell. All the challenger could do was look up and watch the majestic flight. Even so, he shouted for the hero to show him everything he had, because he would face him without hesitation. Then the protagonist decided to use his saga again. The charge of a warrior is like a storm. Even aware of how close they were, the opponent remained still, holding his sword resting on his own shoulder. The protagonist quickly approached, wielding the great hammer and preparing the skull crusher saga. The distance between them was getting smaller and smaller, and the protagonist believed he would land the hit. From afar, a great blue light could be seen engulfing the forest during the final impact. However, the protagonist was stopped by a single hand while his hammer was thrown far away. The opponent was now standing, holding the protagonist's head as he listened to his words. He said that his efforts were not enough and that he needed to dedicate himself more seriously to the fight. Then he threw his sword to the ground because he intended to attack using only his bare hands. He closed one hand into a tight fist, with which he would strike the defenseless protagonist directly. All the hero could do at that moment was watch the fist coming toward him. Meanwhile, the opponent was putting all his intent and strength into that devastating frontal punch. He unleashed such a terrifying power that it shattered the rocks on the ground along with the protagonist. The entire area filled with dust as he pushed even harder to completely destroy the enemy. His eyes clearly showed a murderous intent that he was no longer trying to hide in any way. He wondered if that was really all the hero had to show before dying. Turning his back to the protagonist, he placed his hand on the sword's hilt and gripped it firmly. Then he rested it on his shoulder, saying that the protagonist's potential wasn't impressive at all. That's when he heard a loud crash coming from behind and widened his eyes in surprise. He immediately turned around and looked toward the sound with an enigmatic and suspicious expression. It was the protagonist, now rising with determination, unwilling to be defeated so easily. His eyes reflected a firm resolve, the same shared by everyone who truly sought to overcome impossible limits. The rival understood that the goddess must trust him greatly to allow the use of such power. However, with a firm gaze, he said that covering his body with that much power would have serious consequences. And just as he was about to finish the sentence, the protagonist collapsed, fainting while trying to contain that power. Too late now, as the hero was already lying face down on the ground. Sometime later, he slowly opened his eyes and saw Valkyrie Haida beside him, looking worried. The girl stared at him, startled, and asked if he was still feeling okay. Realizing he was awake, the protagonist sat up, feeling extremely embarrassed about the current situation. After calming down, he told his Valkyrie that a crazy man had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He said he genuinely believed he was going to die at the hands of that completely insane man. Turning to the side, he saw the man smiling and telling him to continue exactly from where he left off. Haida sensed the tense atmosphere and decided to introduce the strange man, named Ragnar, to the protagonist. He couldn't understand how that cruel-looking guy could possibly be considered a potential mentor. Even so, Haida insisted because she believed that Ragnar could help him reach new, grand heights. Ragnar also wasn't thrilled about being the mentor of someone as stubborn as that confused young man. Haida placed her hand on her tired head, no longer knowing what to do with the two of them. After talking a bit, she told the protagonist that she was no longer enough to help him the way she did before. Ragnar commented that it was impressive for a lower-ranking warrior to be using powers granted by a goddess. Haida thought he was being arrogant and warned that he'd soon regret those words. Smiling, Haida told the protagonist that she trusted Ragnar and wanted him to show his saga. Though skeptical, the protagonist replied that he would trust if she believed that much in that strange warrior. Taking his metallic feather, he looked at it, knowing it would reveal his saga through it. The Valkyrie wanted to make sure her apprentice knew how to properly use that artifact called the metallic feather. Meanwhile, Ragnar watched, thinking that this boy probably hadn't done anything truly extraordinary or impressive. But when the scroll of his feats was released, the paper turned out to be incredibly long and detailed. With that, Ragnar displayed a face of shock and complexity as he looked at the document. Now he stared at the protagonist with newfound respect, recognizing the merits shown in that enormous saga. Hida watched everything from afar with a certain pride, seeing the well-deserved recognition unfold before her. Seeing Ragnar's reaction, she decided to ask how far he thought the hero could go. She genuinely wanted to know what Ragnar believed about the boy's true hidden potential. As Hida stared at him firmly, waiting for a clear answer, Ragnar hesitated and thought briefly. Almost unwilling to answer, he placed his hand over his mouth and said the young man could reach Sigurd. From the protagonist's expression, he realized he didn't know that name, so he explained it was a legendary supreme warrior. Even so, Hida wasn't satisfied and asked again about the absolute limit of the protagonist's potential. The man wrapped his arm around the protagonist's neck, saying there was still much he had to teach him now. Hida's expression changed, realizing that Ragnar was finally respecting the young apprentice. Even so, she scolded the protagonist, saying he couldn't push past his limits like that ever again. She made it clear that she was entrusting her student into Ragnar's hands because she saw true talent in him. When they were alone, Ragnar admitted that the saga of that young hero was truly extraordinary and admirable. Then he turned his back, saying to her that she didn't need to worry about that training. With the sword on his shoulder, Ragnar heard Hida asking how far he truly believed the hero could go. Once again, he looked at her with a gaze more focused and serious than he had shown before. He noticed that the Valkyrie was expecting a sincere and definitive answer straight from the heart. He thought for a few moments, even furrowing his brows with a much firmer expression. After some time, in a certain place, Captain Siri was gathered with other young warriors. She congratulated the green-haired archer for finally becoming a lower-ranking warrior. She said it was nice to see him, and he replied that his growth was thanks to her. When everyone was gathered, someone noticed the absence of a person who was walking toward them. As he approached, he raised his hand to greet Captain Siri and his friend Rolf. Even among the new warriors, his feats had already become widely known and respected. He looked at Captain Siri confused, and she explained that Rolf had revealed all those things. At that moment, a Valkyrie approached, asking for everyone's attention for a serious announcement. She introduced herself as the leader of the expedition, a Valkyrie named Gander, known for her natural authority. She announced that this was a small expedition composed only of trained lower-ranking warriors. As she spoke, the warriors raised their arms, believing it was indeed something fantastic. The protagonist observed everyone and thought that this legion had a light and relaxed atmosphere. The smiling Valkyrie stated that she would explain the mission details once they arrived at the destination. However, the green-haired archer raised his hand, asking where exactly they were heading. The woman made a thoughtful gesture with her lips before answering clearly and honestly. She said they were going to the land of the Dark Elves, where night was eternal. The name of that place was Svartalfheim, a territory feared even by many veteran warriors. The protagonist widened his eyes, a drop of sweat running down his face upon hearing about the elves. That territory had twisted branches from great trees that intertwined like threatening claws. Everyone was already gathered among the roots of that forest after passing through the mysterious dimensional portal. The last to pass was the protagonist, realizing that it remained dark even during the day. The Valkyrie, with her hand on her waist, checked to confirm that all the warriors were fully gathered. She explained that the mission objective was clear: to exterminate a monster that had recently awakened. While speaking, she captured everyone's attention, and the protagonist widened his eyes without understanding. She explained that a member of the Dark Elves had awakened a basilisk from its long hibernation. Captain Siri listened carefully and asked if it was the King of Serpents. The Valkyrie confirmed with a gesture and said they would specially send what was called the White Silence. All the warriors cheered with euphoria upon hearing the expression White Silence spoken by the Valkyrie. The protagonist frowned in boredom, not knowing exactly what that could mean. With doubt in his eyes, he asked Captain Siri what the White Silence was. At that moment, a pack of giant white wolves appeared, each with a gemstone on its forehead. The protagonist found those beings magnificent, with an incredible and majestic appearance as they moved silently. Despite their size, their paws were light, leaving almost imperceptible footprints on the forest floor. They were discreet but also incredibly fast, making any tracking attempt during a pursuit nearly impossible. Riding one of the wolves, the protagonist couldn't understand how such silent creatures could be so fast. As she rode beside him, the Valkyrie praised his skills as an exceptional and focused rider. She bit her lips slightly as she said he was a very desirable talent. The protagonist blushed upon hearing that, not knowing how to react to such a direct comment. The Valkyrie then informed Captain Siri that she would take care of other matters and left the mission. After that, everyone moved at a considerable speed, eager to reach the destination set by Valkyrie Gander. Soon, they spotted a large city in the distance and the elf who would formally receive them at the gate. They slowly approached the elf, who remained standing, watching everyone with a calm and attentive gaze. It was a long, white-haired elf who would escort them to the head of the family. Now they walked down a narrow path, silently following the long-haired elf with respectful silence. As they walked, several elves observed them, with some even whispering discreetly among themselves. Among the elves, there was a mother with her young child, who got scared upon seeing them. The protagonist, paying attention to everything, noticed that the elves did not seem welcoming or friendly to foreigners. However, he considered it positive that none of them showed hostility toward the group. After some time, the elf informed them that they had finally arrived at the destination of the delegation. In that forest where the sun never shone, there was an incredibly large and majestic castle. As the large gates opened, everyone felt anxious to finally be able to enter. Gathered outside, the elf, with a serene expression, said that they could enter immediately. With the door slightly open, they saw a table full of servants and the leader sitting at the head. The silhouette of the elf informed the emperor that the guests had just arrived at that moment. Without showing joy, he said that the guests must be tired after such a long journey. Now the warriors were invited to serve themselves freely, which made them excited. One of the warriors smiled as a maid kindly adjusted his chair with care. Another maid served wine to Rolf, who showed a happy and satisfied expression with everything. The leader of the elves raised his glass, asking everyone else to join him for a toast. All the warriors simultaneously looked at their leader, Captain Siri, waiting for her approval. Noticing their desire, Siri said that one sip of wine wouldn't do any harm. With her consent, everyone raised their glasses cheerfully, celebrating the chance to drink again. The protagonist watched the joyful warriors, satisfied that they could taste that alcoholic drink once more. He remained calm, intending to try the drink, but didn't show the same enthusiasm as the others. Something unexpected happened, making the protagonist widen his eyes and look to the side. He noticed something strange in his glass and in the drinks of all the other warriors there. In an instant, he dashed like the wind, knocking over all the glasses to stop the toast. Then he became even more alert, running quickly after briefly glancing to the side. While running, he shouted for Captain Siri to order everyone to leave that place immediately. Siri quickly understood the situation and stood up, yelling for everyone to run as fast as possible. The elf chief, with a serious expression, ordered the main gate to be closed immediately. The protagonist ran desperately, while some knights managed to keep up with his impressive speed. Using his all-seeing eyes, he noticed that the enemy was already above them. He sprinted from one room to another, trying to reach the gate before it was completely closed. Meanwhile, the elf archers were already positioned, preparing their bows to fire arrows. The warriors had no choice but to defend themselves with their heavy shields. The protagonist saw a rain of arrows as he ran at extreme speed through the passage. He needed to reach the main gate before the elves could close it completely. Since the gate was heavy, not even two elves together could close it fast enough. The protagonist rushed and managed to kick the face of an elf who was blocking the way. Meanwhile, the elf chief looked at the devastated table, full of food and drinks. He trembled with rage and clenched his teeth, unable to understand how they had noticed anything. The leader couldn't believe he had given any signal that revealed his true secret identity. The problem was the floating name above his head, revealing that he was a follower of Loki. After the protagonist prevented the gates from being closed, all the warriors managed to pass through them. Captain Siri was also running as fast as she could. At a certain moment, she used the special whistle to call the silent nest. Hearing that whistle, those large wolves with a blue stone on their foreheads arrived to carry the warriors. Meanwhile, the elves' order was to not let any of them escape, so they kept firing arrows. The elf who had welcomed the warriors led the group of archers, ordering them to spare no one. The protagonist stood still and seemed like he would be hit by all those arrows. Rolling up his sleeves, the protagonist revealed that he had different tattoos. His eyes showed a look of absolute certainty. As he displayed those tattoos, they began to glow. For better understanding, it is shown that long before Hida, the protagonist's Valkyrie, had made that drawing. At the time of the drawing, he got very nervous because he had to be shirtless near her. But on that occasion, Hida explained that the engraving was temporary, and he could remove it whenever he wanted. She said she had made as many engravings as possible in the small space on his body. Those were runes. When the protagonist stood in front of the arrows, he invoked a spell from those engravings. None of those arrows were able to touch his skin, and a great flash of light was emitted near him. With that, all the elves stood with their mouths open while their leader ran to see what had happened. The leader asked why everyone was standing there staring, demanding that they catch them as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the warriors managed to escape riding the large white wolves. By now it was a bit too late. The elves could only watch the closed gate while all the heroes were already far away. The elf chief knelt and trembled, not knowing how he would explain this to Loki. Far from there, the warriors had stopped in a certain part of the forest. The mounts seemed tired and were now lying down, taking a nap, while some others were simply resting. While taking a short break, they checked the arrow wounds that some of them had received. But since they were brave warriors, they simply pulled the arrows out. One of them, after pulling out the arrow, tasted the tip with his tongue and noticed it had a potent poison. Now they asked to rest a little and take care of the wounds while Captain Siri just watched. Already prepared to mount again, she told everyone to handle it while moving forward. He stated that they couldn't relax until they found Valkyrie Gander, while the castle was shown in the background. The elf leader was still on the ground, trembling, not knowing how he could possibly explain what had happened. His eyes showed pure fear as he listened to his god speaking to him. Locke manifested as a violet-colored flame, disappointed that his servant had failed. Now that elf, kneeling with his head against the floor, begged God Locke to let him borrow the basilisk. Locke refused, but informed him that he had prepared something for a situation like this. He told the elf that the preparations should already be on their way, while the warriors kept moving forward. The archer turned to the protagonist and asked how he knew that the chief's family was an enemy. The protagonist explained it was thanks to the saga, and thanked them for trusting him right away. Captain Siri said it was natural, since as companions, they should always have mutual trust. But she looked behind, her eyes showing a certain fear. She was seeing a portal opening behind the warriors. She shouted for everyone to be careful. They had just walked right into an ambush. From the portal, something started to emerge and attacked the warriors at the rear. As one of them was attacked, he screamed, asking how he had been hit and what was happening. Something very strange seemed to be coming out of that portal, completely shrouded in darkness. The protagonist screamed in his mind that this creature was extremely dangerous. Looking closely, he realized that creature was a boss. Its name was Restorer Marcos. When it fully stepped out of the portal, they noticed it was a strange being, muscular, with a hook instead of one hand. When the warriors tried to attack that thing, they noticed it was releasing some sort of violet mist. That creature was incredibly fast and managed to copy several warriors at the same time. Pointing their fingers, the warriors commented that 3 of them were annihilated in a matter of seconds. And now something even weirder was happening, glowing in neon green tones. They noticed that the wounds on that creature healed within moments. Captain Siri shouted that it was the Restorer, and the protagonist thought the name was rather strange. She warned that they should mount their rides and get away from that thing immediately. All the warriors rushed to follow the captain's orders, but the Restorer wasn't willing to let that happen and prepared to stop them. When it stretched its arms toward them, several snakes shot out, extending until they reached the warriors. The snakes managed to grab them, pulling them off their mounts and striking them with blows. One of the snake heads tried to wrap around Captain Siri, who was frantically thinking of how to escape. Meanwhile, the Restorer was running straight toward her to finish her off. As he rapidly closed the distance to fulfill his purpose, she prepared to shoot as many arrows as necessary at him. Even though her aim was incredibly precise, it wouldn't do much damage to a being like that. Even hitting every shot, it regenerated in a matter of moments. She knew he wouldn't even bother blocking the arrows because the healing was almost instant. Because of that, she was forced to block his next attack, which came as fast as a blink. He prepared a flurry of punches and knee strikes aimed at her. Despite her skill, she was hit with a punch to the face that sent her flying far away. The green-haired archer, upon seeing his captain being launched, screamed with an enraged expression. He readied his bow with a flaming arrow to fire at the being he now cursed as damned. Even with the arrow engulfed in flames, it wasn't able to cause much damage to that creature. Still, the archer managed to buy enough time to grab the captain in his arms and flee with her. Now he felt an overwhelming presence closing in from behind, like cicadas shrieking to devour his head. However, that creature sensed an even more devastating presence approaching from behind him. It was the protagonist who launched himself as high as possible to attack the Restorer from behind. Forced to neutralize the protagonist's strike, the Restorer had no choice but to release the captain. The hero declared, looking straight at the creature, that he would be his opponent and wouldn't let him hurt anyone else. The protagonist was fully determined to face the Restorer, giving his allies a chance to escape. The enemy grinned, realizing that he had finally found an opponent worthy of his true power. Snakes were launched toward the hero, wrapping around his arms and legs with savage ferocity. However, they were all easily sliced apart by the sharp blade the protagonist wielded with total conviction. The hero held his sword firmly, his teeth clenched, showing an expression of unshakable determination. He noticed the enemy didn't bother dodging the strikes, so he decided to make the fight more interesting right away. Imbuing his sword with the divine power of the goddess, the protagonist charged forward with impressive aggression. Rolf saw the movement and was surprised to realize that the hero had actually landed the strike. Now with his back turned to the Restorer, the hero simply waited to see how that enemy would react. Even wounded in the abdomen, the Restorer still smiled, as if taking pleasure in the challenge he had received. The protagonist turned, staring at the enemy with blue eyes glowing with intense golden tones. That glow left the restorer confused, as it revealed a power unlike anything he had ever known. The hero had been trained by someone who understood the hidden powers of unknown superior entities. With cleverness, he applied everything he had learned, using his experience to overcome that powerful adversary. He watched the enemy's feet, observing the violet blood that flowed endlessly onto the ground. He also noticed the hateful glare that the restorer cast toward him with growing intensity. The surprise was clear when the restorer noticed his own hands covered in thick violet blood. Ready to strike again, the hero understood that this enemy had not been easily wounded before. Furious, the restorer decided he wouldn't allow another attack from that young man who had challenged him. Both were ready for another intense round of rapid and successive attacks and defenses. They attacked and defended with everything they had, the protagonist unleashing thousands of fast successive strikes. Even so, the restorer managed to keep up and block the attacks with equivalent precision and speed. The archer thought the enemy was struggling, but the captain realized that was a mistake. She knew that despite the apparent advantage, the hero would tire first due to the extreme effort. The attacks didn't stop, coming in relentless succession as the protagonist shouted with all his strength. As determined as he was, it was clear that he would physically exhaust himself before the relentless opponent. The captain wouldn't allow her ally to fall into disadvantage against that powerful and violent restorer. The enemy tried to strike him again, but his fatigue prevented an effective reaction against the hero. By a hair's breadth, the protagonist avoided being hit, escaping at the last moment with extreme effort. Taking advantage of this, the restorer tried to hit him again, certain that this time he would succeed with precision. The hero was tired, struggling to dodge, and his strength was visibly far too diminished. Even so, he clenched his teeth and kept his eyes fixed on the tireless enemy before him. With determination, he lunged once more at the restorer, who raised his arms violently. This time the attack was different. The restorer launched a snake toward the hero, breaking his defensive posture. This distraction left the protagonist vulnerable, allowing the enemy to approach quickly. Luckily, the captain appeared and blocked the strike before it could hit the defenseless hero. Her appearance was so fast that the enemy didn't even notice when she had fully closed the distance. After wounding the restorer, she warned that she knew about his regeneration but demanded that he retreat immediately. Seizing the opening created by the captain, the hero, imbued with divine power, executed a precise strike. This time, he struck the enemy's stomach with such force that he spat blood instantly. Panting and sweating, the protagonist declared that this still wasn't the end of the current fight. With that, he activated the warrior sword saga together with the brutally reinforced skull crusher. Now he wielded his great hammer with the intent of hitting the enemy with overwhelming concentrated force. Elsewhere, the violet smoke spoke with the leader of the Zelfos, reporting the fall of the restorer. Locke, that dark power, warned that the excavation should be halted immediately without further delay. With no other choice, the elf leader was informed that they would have to release the basilisk trapped in the caves. Meanwhile, the hero remained unconscious on the ground, exhausted from using so much of his vital energy. His injuries weren't serious, but the unconsciousness worried his allies who were nearby. Rolf informed the captain that the hero wasn't waking up and asked if they should wait there. The captain replied that she had a bad feeling and that they needed to leave that dangerous place immediately. As she spoke, a strange noise echoed through the dark forest, catching the attention of all the warriors. The green-haired archer recognized the sound and suspected the approach of the colossal ancestral basilisk. He asked which direction the creature was coming from, since they were cornered in that place. The captain responded that they had to escape at all costs and reunite with the Valkyrie as quickly as possible. Faced with the threat, the warriors once again swore loyalty to Valhalla with firm and united voices. The captain ordered everyone to move immediately, for they were fighting for Asgard and the Nine Realms. Meanwhile, Rolf asked what to do with the still unconscious hero lying on the ground. He looked at the captain, who stated that she herself would take care of him with extra attention. Rolf asked her to be careful, then ran off to quickly gather the other survivors. The captain remained still, watching the hero lying there, noticing that something was starting to react inside him. She placed her hands on the hero's chest, emanating a gentle light that enveloped his body. It was the saga of the Wolf Witch, now beginning to fully manifest. The transformation began, and the captain took the form of a wolf, keeping her striking blue markings. With her teeth, she grabbed the hero's clothes, preparing to carry him while fleeing quickly. She knew she had to run fast, as the basilisk was already hunting them through the forest trails. The eyes of that black serpent glowed with excitement at the thought that its prey was within reach. The protagonist was still unconscious, trapped in a deep sleep with no signs of reaction. He seemed to be dreaming of Hida, as if immersed in warm memories of that moment. Upon waking, he found Captain Siri watching him silently with a worried expression. It took him a few moments to realize the embarrassing position they were in within that awkward situation. He immediately blushed, flustered, but was silenced by the captain with a firm gesture. She warned that if they moved, the stealth blessing would be completely nullified. She said the enemy would chase them instantly if the protection from her divine blessing broke. Taho insisted that Siri shouldn't have taken the risk and should have fled with the group. Siri stared at him seriously, responding with a firm expression and eyes full of conviction. She said his powers were special, and Valhalla couldn't afford to lose him. She added that she enjoyed fighting by his side and didn't wish for the final rest. Taho blushed completely upon hearing those sincere words from the captain about trust and partnership. He thought he could never betray that trust, feeling his heart pound stronger in silence. He sincerely thanked Captain Siri, recognizing everything she had done up to that moment. She explained that the situation had become critical as he took too long to awaken from his state. She said she had tried everything to wake him, and now they needed to act immediately together. Taho showed a determined and firm gaze, ready to follow her to the very end. The captain shifted into her wolf form and sprinted forward, carrying the hero with supernatural lightness. He asked her to trust him, activating his special saga of the ancestral command of the dragons. He infused her with power using that divine ability, surprising the captain with the overwhelming energy transferred. As they advanced, they noticed monsters appearing everywhere among the trees of the cursed forest. Monstrous snakes emerged with ferocity and charged at the two in a brutal assault. The protagonist reacted with speed and skill, slicing through the enemies with precise and rapid consecutive strikes. Even after defeating numerous snakes, they kept advancing fiercely like an endless tide of destruction. Taho had to push himself harder, using a powerful vertical technique that split the monsters in half. With another horizontal slash, he shredded the serpents until only shapeless cubes of flesh remained. But the real threat was yet to come, as the giant basilisk approached in rising fury. The monster advanced, breaking trees like dry twigs, with brutal force and terrifying eyes. With a bestial roar, it stopped in front of the duo, exhaling hatred and imposing its presence in the air. Siri warned about the basilisk's paralyzing power, present in the venomous eyes of that mythical creature. Taho quickly leaped to dodge the beast's initial attack, landing on Siri with impressive dexterity. She stopped running, standing still, and both faced the monster in silence. The creature maintained an imposing stance, roaring again with force, staring down the two warriors without hesitation. Taho told Siri to prepare because they would attack together with all their strength. The giant poisonous serpent unleashed a dense cloud of toxic smoke toward the two warriors. The protagonist activated a spell called Gant, inscribed on his body by his Valkyrie Hida. Siri leaped high, aiming to reach the blind spot above the monstrous creature. Taho activated another saga, this time a strengthening one, preparing for a direct attack. He hurled himself against the basilisk with fury, even while being stared at directly by the cursed creature. His eyes shone with divine power as he unleashed the true potential of the gifts he possessed. Then he used the saga of the warrior's sword and struck with his heady spear. The blow destroyed the creature, ending the battle with a precise strike full of concentrated energy. Siri's transformation came to an end, and she slowly returned to her human form. Taho could barely stand, so the captain suggested they rest for a few minutes. He was truly exhausted, drained, feeling every fiber of his body resisting at its limit. Looking at the basilisk's corpse, he noticed something shining deeply embedded in the destroyed body. He pulled the glowing object out with effort and examined it carefully under the faint light. It was the hilt of an ancient and broken sword, possibly a relic of great value. Before he could finish his thought, Siri urgently called him with sudden concern. She warned that they were surrounded again, forcing them to immediately take defensive positions. Both stood side by side, alert and firmly covering each other's backs. Taho pondered that he truly had no more strength, but he couldn't simply run away now. Siri told him to flee and leave her behind, taking responsibility for that fight. Surprised by the captain's words, Taho noticed that she was even more wounded. He refused the request, saying they would survive together and return alive to Valhalla. Both exchanged silent glances, sharing trust amid the approaching danger. Siri stated that they would meet again in Valhalla, with a smile full of resignation. Monstrous snakes attacked as a group, completely surrounding the pair without giving them time to react. They fought with everything they had, slicing down enemies one by one with precise and brutal movements. When they least expected it, enormous eyes appeared in the darkness, watching them with predatory focus. They were the eyes of a basilisk, emerging from the shadows after all the regular snakes have fallen. Taho declared that now the real fight began against one of the remaining gigantic creatures. Siri warned that the situation was much worse than it appeared in that dangerous moment. Another basilisk suddenly appeared, followed by one more, making the situation even more desperate. As if that wasn't enough, a fourth basilisk showed up, completely surrounding the exhausted warriors. They were surrounded by basilisks, with the air thick with poison, tension, and imminent destruction. There were 5 basilisks against the duo, who who were clearly at their physical and mental limits. They were completely cornered and realized there was no escape route left. Captain Siri asked Taho if he still had enough strength to keep fighting. Extremely exhausted, he couldn't use divine power anymore and could barely use the saga twice. Even in that desperate circumstance, the warrior didn't wish to abandon the fight or accept the end. Gripping his sword tightly, he decided he would fight until the end with everything he still had. He firmly declared that escape was not a valid option and that he would face everything until death. Siri praised him and declared that he was a true warrior worthy of being in Valhalla. Both performed solemn salutes to the gods, preparing for what could be their final battle. At that moment, they heard someone calling them from afar, breaking the despair like an unexpected voice of salvation. In the most critical moment, the rest of the group arrived, launching themselves against a basilisk with surprising violence. A Valkyrie sliced the monster with precision and said she would eliminate them all without hesitation or mercy. Despite the help, Taho was still in danger, as a basilisk charged directly toward him. However, the monster was suddenly sliced in half, surprising the warrior, who didn't understand what had just happened. As the body fell, the one responsible for the cut revealed himself, stating that Taho had resisted admirably well. The newcomer declared that the warrior could now rest and leave the rest of the fight to them. Ragnar had arrived, filling Taho with relief and joy at the presence of that legendary ally. Siri was surprised and blushed, shyly asking if that man was really Ragnar Lodbrok in person. That sudden and sweet attitude from the captain outraged the hero, who never imagined that side of her. Meanwhile, the rest of the group fought the basilisks with agility, taking them down one by one quickly. Some monsters fell with impressive ease, thanks to the combined strength of the elite warriors. When the last basilisk fell, silence took over the battlefield, completely ending the fight. Ragnar then announced the end of the battle and praised everyone present for the bravery shown in combat. Most were more excited to meet Ragnar than to have survived the bloody fight. Taho watched everything from the back, indifferent to the general euphoria, just relieved to still be alive. The Valkyrie informed them that the mission ended there and that Ragnar should leave the rest to Rosgrid. She said she had investigated the Malo family alongside the Elven Council after Marcus appeared. According to her, the appearance of the Regenerator indicated direct involvement of the giants in the current conspiracy. Turning to the hero, she stated that defeating Marcus was an important and worthy accomplishment. She promised to report everything to Ullr so that Taho would be rewarded for this significant recent feat. The warrior humbly thanked her, unable to hide his relief at hearing recognition from that powerful Valkyrie. Licking her lips in a strange way, she stated that the hero was a highly desirable talent that provoked suspicious and jealous looks from the other members of the group gathered there. The Valkyrie announced their departure, informing everyone that they should return now that the mission was completed. Taho brought the sword hilt he had found earlier so that the redhead could examine it closely. She regretted not being able to identify anything specific, saying the piece was too damaged for analysis. However, she guaranteed that the material was unusual and carried residual traces of the ancient mythical wars. She explained that although the current Ragnarok was on hold, colossal battles had occurred in very ancient times. These events left traces all over the world, and the sword had clearly been used back in that era. Taho thought to himself that he also felt there was something special about that mysterious fragment. He decided to carefully keep the hilt, recognizing that it might hold some hidden valuable power. The redhead informed him that they would both head to Idun's temple to report the details of the expedition. Some time later, already at the port, the two quietly boarded a small rowboat. The trip on that little boat was long and slow, marked by absolute silence between the two. Only after some time sailing did the redhead finally break the silence with unexpected news. She said that this time Idun had prepared a special gift, exclusively for the warrior Taho. Excited, the hero said he had a good feeling about the reward he was about to receive. She smiled and replied that she had the same feeling, asking if he would show her the gift afterward. Taho replied that of course he would, and then said goodbye to enter the goddess's temple alone. He placed the golden apple on the magic circle, which immediately activated upon sensing the item. Idun appeared joyful, showing immense happiness at seeing her warrior again after completing the difficult mission. Kneeling respectfully, Taho stated that it was an honor to be in her presence once again. The goddess acknowledged his merit and said that without him, the giant's plans would have moved forward. Modest, the hero credited his success to the goddess's constant blessing and guidance throughout the journey. Idun said she was pleased to see him return alive, showing care and relief for his safety. In a playful tone, she commented that she had heard Taho had ridden a beautiful warrior during the battle. Embarrassed, he tried to explain himself, but was visibly flustered and couldn't find proper words to respond. Returning to the main subject, the goddess explained that he deserved a special reward for his performance. She offered him two options, the winged steed outfit or a magic storage bag. The outfit allowed the user to transform into a powerful winged horse with exceptional flying capabilities. The magic bag shrank any item placed inside, returning it to its original size when removed. Taho felt torn between the two items, surprised by how useful and powerful both were. Aiden reassured him, saying that the unchosen item would be given as a reward in the next mission. That relieved the hero, who could now calmly think before making his final decision. After thinking carefully, Taho made his choice, determined to make the most of whichever it was. Returning to the redhead's side, he revealed his decision, completely surprising her with his unexpected choice. She thought he would pick the outfit, but he explained that the outfit required a reliable partner. He added that in games, increasing inventory space was always a priority for anyone facing long and dangerous journeys. Back on the little boat, the redhead commented that he would soon have lessons with a new and famous teacher. She asked if he already knew who it was, curious about the warrior's reaction to that news. Taho replied that yes, and said he was excited because his new master was considered a legend. Meanwhile, that so-called legend was waking up slowly, leaning against a wall, showing his characteristic laziness. The man looked calmly at the sky and said that the weather today was simply perfect. Now sitting with his great mentor, both were silent until Ragnar started a conversation. He casually asked how far Taho had gone in his relationship with Hida. Blushing, embarrassed, and clumsy, the protagonist wanted to know exactly what Ragnar meant by that. Ragnar simply commented about the lessons, saying the protagonist's mind was way too dirty. Only then did the protagonist understand everything, and that misunderstanding made Ragnar laugh openly at him. Ending the jokes, Ragnar stated that from that moment on, real training would begin. Even though Hida had asked him to teach about divinity, they would start with the most fundamental basics. Ragnar began by teaching how to increase power duration, but said he wouldn't explain the details directly. He told the protagonist that he would have to figure it out on his own, but Taho accepted anyway. Right after, Ragnar ordered them to start immediately, and the next moment they were already crossing swords. The hero had to push himself hard to keep up with the intense pace of that fight against his instructor. Ragnar asked Taho to show all his sagas and not to hide any relevant technique. He explained that sagas were the foundation, and even with divine powers, they should never be abandoned. With that, the protagonist activated all his sagas and charged forward with everything he had against his master. Even so, he ended up thrown to the ground just a few moments later, defeated with absurd ease. While fighting, Ragnar immediately came up with two ideas about what Taho needed to improve now. First, she had many useful support sagas, but no truly decisive offensive skill, effectively useful in combat. The protagonist reflected on that, seriously considering creating a powerful ultimate ability. According to Ragnar, all of the protagonist's sagas were incomplete in a subtle way. He explained that many low-ranking warriors believed their sagas only serve one purpose, but sagas are stories that change depending on how they are told, possessing hidden applications unknown to many. Ending the lesson, Ragnar asked him to reflect on what he had learned in that intense session. Before leaving, he warned that to train divine power, the protagonist should maintain it even while sleeping. After that, Ragnar left, leaving the protagonist completely exhausted, collapsed on the ground in silence. He could barely stay on his feet, mumbling that there was still so much work ahead and everything was difficult. By late afternoon at sunset, someone was calmly preparing dinner. In the kitchen, the little redhead was quietly frying shrimp for dinner with full concentration. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Ragnar were engaged in yet another intense physical training session. Observing Taho's determination, Ragnar asked if he had anything new to show. Taho confirmed, activating the warrior sword saga and summoning his usual sword once again. Curious, Ragnar asked what was new about that seemingly ordinary summoning. Very confident, the protagonist drew an old broken sword hilt with a special appearance. With the hilt in hand, he activated the same saga again and summoned a completely different sword. The new sword was much more beautiful and radiated an intensely powerful aura all around. He explained that by using that hilt, the saga summoned an upgraded version of the usual sword. Ragnar asked if that was his final move while thinking about the unusual originality he had shown. Before they could dive deeper into the analysis, the little redhead appeared, interrupting them immediately. She announced that Taho had received a support request directly from Ragrid. She also said that he needed to go immediately without question, as it was an urgent matter. Taho asked the reason for the summons, and she explained that Ragrid wanted him to see it. Ragrid thought it would be interesting for him to visit the location personally at least once. The protagonist thought it was an excellent opportunity, and maybe he would find fragments of the broken sword. His excitement sparked jealousy in the little redhead, who bluntly questioned his interest in Ragrid. Taho denied any such intentions, saying that he was already leaving at that very moment. Even so, the redhead remained jealous while watching him prepare to leave. Ragnar, who had just been listening, thought that this protagonist was truly a complete idiot. Under a starry sky, a creature partially arachnid sat atop a vast web. A figure with moth-like features approached respectfully to report to its superior. She told Lord Aval that the Giant of Strength was moving slowly. Aval replied that he already knew that and had been watching every movement closely. He said that the followers of the Giant of Strength, Harad, were heading towards Svartalfheim. He commented that the situation was exciting and that he couldn't wait to see all the fun unfold. Elsewhere in the world, a warrior placed his hand on his chest and introduced himself. He said he was a low-ranking member of Odin's Legion with great pride. The other warriors observed in silence as he spoke about their reputation. He invited them to follow him, saying he had prepared 30 horses to move quickly through the forest. Everyone mounted and followed the warrior through the woods, with the horses ready for the mission. While riding, the protagonist found the saddle strange and commented to Ciri about the weird sensation. He noticed a strange expression on Rolf's face and asked what had happened. The guide warrior looked back, informing them that they were close to the main excavation site. The protagonist set his doubts aside and advanced alongside another warrior through the trees. During the ride, he heard a sound like a horn and asked if anyone knew what it was. Up ahead was a pack of wolves with red eyes, heavily armed for combat. The captain warned that they were just weak enemies and they could pass straight through on horseback. So no warrior stopped, and they trampled all the wolves, leaving a trail of destruction behind. At a certain point, everyone was amazed, looking at the sky without understanding what they were seeing. Looking closely, they realized it was a flock of harpies flying quickly toward them. The harpies now tried to attack the warriors, who remained mounted on their fast horses. They approached too quickly, making it impossible to use bows or any other weapons effectively. Amid the chaos, Ciri fought bravely against the harpies with agile and precise movements. Rolf also defended himself, fighting the harpies furiously as the chaos intensified. Meanwhile, the protagonist held the reins tightly and wielded his broken sword. The scene didn't change. It was complete disorder, with the harpies proving to be terrible opponents. Suddenly, a light intensified, frightening the horses and the harpies alike. The light came from a sword wielded by a warrior determined to restore order. This warrior was the protagonist, now determined to bring order to all the chaos around him. Even the hero's allied warriors couldn't believe what he had just done. After using that maneuver to capture the harpies, several warriors began watching him closely. That made him slightly embarrassed, but he quietly said that he did it for Idun. They set off again at extremely high speed, each mounted on their own well-prepared battle horses. The warrior of Odin warned them that they would soon join his powerful legion, advancing rapidly. Looking ahead, the protagonist intensified the blue glow in his eyes, finding it all unbelievably impressive. The trail of the Great War unfolded before his eyes, something unbelievable and full of destruction. The riders quickly approached the core where the main warriors of that battlefield were gathered. Meanwhile, the beautiful Ciri activated her saga known as the Witch's Arrows Never Miss. She fired several arrows in a single shot, making sure none missed their true targets. She shouted that this was the moment and that everyone should advance with full force immediately. All the warriors obeyed her orders, including the hero, who held his broken sword. He was willing to unleash his saga called Warrior's Sword, even with that shattered blade. In addition, he also wielded a harpoon to use his trained archer skills in aerial combat. After imbuing lightning into the harpoon, he managed to fire several flashes toward distant enemies. This caught the attention of the surrounding warriors, impressed by the hero's unexpected performance. His all-seeing eyes allowed him to easily analyze the individual abilities of each warrior present. Because of that, he shouted for Razgrid, the Valkyrie flying low while fighting the enemies around. She was dealing with enemies who dared get too close, then glanced sideways at the hero. She said it was good to see him again and showed relief upon recognizing his presence there. Dismounting from his horse, the hero asked about the current situation and received immediate answers from the Valkyrie. She informed him that they were relatively balanced, but the enemy was also using something similar to metal rain. Warriors started shouting that more enemies were being launched toward them en masse. Everyone looked up and noticed a dense layer from which new violent enemies were emerging. They were being launched in the same way that the warriors of Valhalla arrived on the battlefield. When one container hit the ground, wolves with intense blue eyes emerged from the fiery cracks. They realized that stronger enemies were being sent, surpassing the previous ones in destructive power. The protagonist didn't understand what their real intention was in sending such powerful beings together. But when looking up, he noticed that one container was larger than any of the ones seen before. When it touched the ground, cracks formed, and red lightning violently burst out in every direction. Soon more containers began falling, launched even harder and surrounded by flames. Razgrid was alarmed because she knew that area was near the ancient village of the Dark Elves. One of the containers fell with even more intense cracks, releasing a malevolent energy never seen before. The protagonist was astonished because the container had almost landed directly on his head. Reskrid shouted that he should head to the Eld's village because she trusted only him for this task. She informed him that something monstrous had fallen into the village and that only the hero could handle it. He nodded, quickly mounted up, and prepared to ride toward the burning village. Reskrid said there was no time and took off her coat in front of the hero, embarrassed. She handed him the coat made of dragon wings, asking that he entrust it to someone reliable. At first he thought about the green-haired archer but figured it might not suit him. Soon, large feathered wings spread and a gigantic winged creature appeared from the skies. Captain Siri was now wearing the dragon wing mantle and carried the hero with her. As soon as they spotted the village, they noticed it was completely consumed by supernatural flames. These flames emanated from the cracked container, releasing a malice opposite to the sacred runes. The giant at the center absorbed power and grew as the enemies around were successively defeated. With its mouth wide open, the giant exhaled madness, dragging its allies to fight with fervor. From its mouth came an intense light that damaged the vision of nearby enemy warriors. It filled the battlefield with explosive leaves while wolves with red eyes emerged from the flanks. The giant seemed made of fire and lava, with a demonic face and long pointed horns. However, the giant the protagonist was pursuing was different, emerging from a container with a greenish hue. The monster terrified the elves, who were brutally attacked as they desperately tried to flee in chaos. The protagonist noticed by its attire that the giant could only be an extremely dangerous mage. It soon formed a green magical core, then launched it directly at the terrified elves. The attack drove the survivors even more insane, causing them to lose control of their own thoughts. With no alternatives, the hero decided to bravely draw the enemy's attention to himself. Riding Siri, now empowered with the mantle, they charged swiftly toward that demonic monster. He prepared to launch his attack with precision, aiming directly at the giant mage's head. However, his spear struck a powerful magical barrier and didn't even scratch the protection. The protagonist could hardly believe that his attack had been completely nullified so easily. The giant mage remained untouched, surrounded by a magical defense of absurdly high level. Now the hero needed to come up with a smarter plan to defeat that terrible opponent. As he thought, he observed the cold and mocking expression on the face of that enormous enemy. The giant turned his head and looked directly at the protagonist with a certain silent disdain. He had successfully drawn the creature's attention, but it might cost him dearly in the future. The mage began forming another magic core, now glowing in shades of green and yellow. He used both cores like machine guns, firing powerful and fast beams in all directions. Even for Siri, an experienced wolf, it was extremely difficult to dodge so many simultaneous attacks. The goblin village and its inhabitants suffered once again, destroyed by that magical barrage. The protagonist looked at the village with sorrow, realizing it was about to disappear completely. While thinking about what to do, he asked Captain Siri if she had any life-saving suggestions. Even without an immediate response, he was already begging himself to think of an effective alternative. Meanwhile, the mage held both magic cores, staring directly at them with precision. At the top of a mountain stood a fortress, a place where snow always fell. In this place, lit by several torches, there was a throne. On it, someone was sitting. The bird that arrived there was welcomed and allowed to perch on one of that person's fingers. They were talking about that half-arachnid being. He was undecided about whether or not to use the dark elves. Meanwhile, that person with colorful hair pulled the cork from a wine bottle using sharp teeth. Talking about her strategies, she gently poured wine into her horn-shaped glass. She smiled as she admitted she wished everything would be destroyed by the giants. She was talking about the two giants that had been thrown into the region and were now fighting the warriors of Valhalla. She raised her horn-shaped glass high, toasting to a new era and to the end of Valhalla's warriors. The woman with the eye patch wanted to drag Valhalla back to the glorious times when the Great War existed. In another scene, the fight continued. The protagonist was being bombarded by that magical giant. The protagonist said the giant wasn't the only one capable of throwing things. After saying that, he launched several sharp weapons in the giant's direction. And just like everything else he had thrown at the magical giant, none of it actually touched the target. That was starting to annoy the protagonist extremely. At that pace, he kept throwing various things at the giant. At one point, Captain Siri, in her wolf form, asked the protagonist if it was having any effect. He was sweating, saying he wasn't sure if it was working, but in games, that's how it was done. With that, he appeared riding Captain Siri, who looked adorable, as he explained that he needed to cause damage. Lee Tahoe's goal was to deal enough damage and keep attacking while the giant was reconstructing itself. Elsewhere, the Valkyrie Reskrid was fighting that flaming giant. She looked at that monster with a serious expression, imagining that he wouldn't be an easy opponent. The monster also stared at the Valkyrie with a skull-like grin on his face. The giant, covered in lava and fire, clenched his fists while the Valkyrie prepared with quick footwork. She launched herself, gripping her sword and flapping her wings toward the monster. Meanwhile, he was already preparing a powerful punch aimed directly at her. The power of the two collided, and a massive fireball lit up a large portion of the battlefield. Dealing with the other magical giant was the protagonist, still flying on Captain Siri. He still had sharp weapons and continued throwing them at the giant. Looking at the destruction in the village, he grew worried. He thought that if he didn't find a weak point soon, the village wouldn't survive. In the village among the elves appeared what seemed to be guards wearing some kind of colorful hats. Above their heads was a sort of lantern that shone with a strange light. All of them walked quickly toward the monster. They called themselves the Dark Elf Fire Department. All raised their hands to the sky and began invoking the rain cloud spell. With the cloud forming, the protagonist could now focus entirely on the fight. Rain began to fall over the magical giant, who suddenly changed color to a dull gray. Something strange was happening with that rain. It seemed to collide with the giant's magical powers. Visibly irritated, the giant seemed bothered by whatever the elves had caused. The hero quickly noticed that the shield was being weakened by the rain, and for that, he silently thanked the elves. Wanting more than ever not to waste time, he launched himself again, attacking the mage with sharp weapons. The warrior's attacks were aimed directly at the magic giant. He wanted to strike before the barrier could be restored. Then he grabbed his broken sword, thinking he had no other choice but to use the powerful final strike. As he prepared for it, the synchronization rate rose to 18. Now the signature ability of the Dragon Knight Kalstad would be used, Draconic Ballista. The protagonist's eyes were now fully glowing in shades of blue as he activated his saga. Holding the sharp weapon, he aimed to hit the giant with the ancient dragon cannon. And when he launched that weapon toward the giant, it dealt a tremendous amount of damage. Immediately, it caused pain to the magic giant. However, something magical appeared inside the giant's body. The protagonist became interested in knowing what that glowing stone was. Pointing his finger at it, he alerted Captain Siri that this was the giant's weak point. Now the two would rush in faster before the giant's body could regenerate. Having a brilliant idea, he asked Captain Siri to support him with her saga. She complied, unleashing her saga. The witch's arrows never missed their target. The protagonist combined it with his own saga. A warrior's charge is like a storm. This created enough power to launch toward the giant, forming a glowing pink light. When the sharp object struck the giant's stone, everything began to shatter apart. Still holding the spear after destroying the stone, the protagonist realized he had achieved something. Now his face twisted as if reality itself was also starting to warp. That magic was also affecting Captain Siri in her wolf form. Things grew even stranger as the protagonist and Siri were both sucked into a swirling violet vortex. After that, the portal slowly began closing with them still inside. The elves watched, confused, unable to understand what had just happened, but they noticed the warrior was gradually vanishing. After being swallowed by that portal, they were thrown into a strange place, completely unsure of where they were. The warrior didn't know where he was, but he was certain that he had defeated the giant. Captain Siri figured it was likely that the core had exploded and thrown them into an invisible rift. The protagonist looked around, terrified, after hearing that this was a remnant of the Great War. Once he realized that, his eyes widened. Now gripping the hilt of his broken sword tightly, he knew that in this place, he could find fragments of legendary weapons. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward Captain Siri, who returned the look. Then he decided to set up a table so they could eat something. The captain was amazed and asked if all of that had been granted by the goddess. It was a bag that could preserve fresh food. She sighed, realizing that inside the protagonist's bag were various foods, including beer. As she ate and drank from her mug, she said things would be difficult. He asked what she meant. She explained that it was about Valkyrie Gander, who wanted to bring him over to their side. But judging by how the goddess treated him, it would be difficult. The protagonist placed his hand on his head while holding the mug, thinking it wasn't just the goddess, there was also Hida. Some time later, after eating and drinking, they both felt more relaxed. Stretching, he said it was time to move on. She asked if he even knew which way to go. The protagonist placed his hand on his waist, looking like he was thinking, still with his back turned to the captain. Then, gripping the hilt of the broken sword, he said maybe the sword knew the answer. After standing up, the protagonist raised the sword and noticed it resonated toward a certain direction. Confident, he looked firmly where the blade was pointing while Siri watched him silently. Soon after, he cast a sharp glance at the captain, who sighed with a disappointed expression, already knowing what he wanted. In no time, he was mounted on her again. Despite her bored expression, Siri went along with his wishes. During the flight, the captain remarked that in Valhalla, it wasn't customary to ask about someone's past. However, she said she needed to because she thought his saga was incredible and was curious about the world he came from. She asked what he used to do before arriving there. Running a hand through his hair, the protagonist replied that he had been a world champion. As they flew over the landscape, she commented that it was amazing, and that now she was carrying someone truly extraordinary. Looking in a certain direction, the protagonist concluded that the exit from that place shouldn't be far. He was startled when the captain asked if he had special eyes, especially when she wanted to know if he was seeing something unusual. That's when he focused to use the eyes that see everything. Observing the ground, he saw thousands of weapons stuck everywhere, objects he hadn't noticed before. His eyes widened, and his face turned red with joy, convinced he should collect them all. He started running back and forth, grabbing everything he could like a child let loose in a toy store. Once he began picking up the items, Siri also started seeing the weapons and asked if he planned to take even the broken ones. While storing everything in his storage bag, a gift from the goddess, he said anything could be useful. However, something shone intensely, catching his full attention. Shortly after, he was seen wearing an Iron Man-style belt, crafted by the Frigga Legion. Looking at the item, he understood it was something special, as it increased both strength and resistance. The captain noticed the emblem of the Frigga Legion on the belt. She told him that this goddess represented love and beauty, but also war and magic. With that, the protagonist dared to imagine that his goddess might secretly master martial arts. Looking at Siri, he suggested that she should also take some equipment. She blushed for a moment but then grabbed a sword and stored it, determined not to leave good items behind. The protagonist smiled and gave her an approving nod, commenting that looting felt pretty good. Meanwhile, the two continued gathering the magical objects scattered around the field. In no time, he was already covered in belts and various accessories. When the captain looked at him, she could barely believe it. He was completely geared from head to toe. However, in the middle of looting, he felt his old broken sword start vibrating strangely. He sensed that the nameless fragment was guiding him once again, drawn to a blue energy emanating from another weapon lying on the ground. Picking it up and examining it, he noticed it was also broken but didn't seem to belong to his old sword. Still, he had no idea what it was. Siri watched silently and commented that both weapons seemed to have come from the same place, maybe from the people of a destroyed world. Pointing at him, she said the fragments might have belonged to that ruined world. She stated it was just a possibility, but either way, they should take the fragments with them. With that, the two resumed walking, hoping to find the exit from that place. They reached the edge of a cliff and looked down at the same time. Something down there startled the protagonist so much that he started sweating. Down below, there were thousands of other weapons, but the energy emanating from there was different, as if the bottom formed a magical basin. As they approached, they saw that the skull of a large monster was releasing an intense blue energy. The captain knelt down and observed the shining item. At first glance, she thought it looked like a sword. She asked the protagonist what he was seeing, and he activated the eyes that see everything once again. Upon saying the name, she was shocked, unable to believe it was Hellhound Garmer. Even without knowing exactly what it was, the captain decided to pull the item out. Suddenly, several bones and skulls of the massive monster began to glow. The protagonist was startled to see the bones moving, molding themselves into something new. Little by little, it took form, resembling an animal made of bones and covered in a malignant energy. Siri had a look of complete astonishment, not understanding why all those bones were coming together. The problem was that the more the bones gathered, the grander and more threatening the creature became. After nearly being fully formed, the being revealed its beastly shape, radiating demonic energy. Suddenly, it raised a paw, and with that gesture, it seemed to be summoning others like itself. Rapidly, several more bones joined together, forming an entire army. Now they were surrounded by creatures resembling wolves with red eyes and monstrous bodies. The gathered bones seemed to belong to the leader of that clan, a gigantic beast-like wolf. Faced with this, the two drew their swords and prepared themselves, certain that the battle was about to begin. The protagonist stared straight ahead, alert to any enemy movement. When he turned around, he was startled. Behind him, several warriors with the same energy as those monsters were appearing out of nowhere. Now he and the captain were caught in the middle of a war between beastly monsters and resurrected warriors. It was only a matter of seconds before the battle began, and the warriors who had been resting returned to the fight. Even in the face of the impossible, the two witnessed the unbelievable right before their eyes. The captain positioned herself for battle and even called the protagonist to join her. However, he grabbed her cloak and pulled her back. She didn't like that, brought her hand to her neck, and asked why he had done that. Pointing forward, he explained that he needed to face the main creature in what would be the final battle. After that, he stared at the captain's expression for a while. He even closed his eyes with a satisfied look, but the captain was not the least bit excited. Once again, he was riding on her, and she had that bored expression. She noted that this way they would fly directly to the boss. As they flew in that direction, the boss merely got into position to start a fight. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and emitted a very loud sound. That high-pitched sound was hurting both the protagonist and the captain's ears, who was in her wolf form. The sound was so aggressive to her that she suddenly transformed back into her human form mid-air. Because of that, everything happened very quickly, and when they realized it, they were already in free fall. Moments later, they were on the ground, with her lying underneath and him on top. He brought one hand to his head, trying to understand what was going on. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he realized he was on top of the captain in a very compromising situation. When he fully grasped the position they were in, he started sweating, and all sorts of thoughts flooded his mind. His hair immediately stood on end, and he started apologizing frantically. She said she was fine and that he didn't need to worry, but the most important thing was getting out of that place. She quickly got up, and he positioned himself in front of her to protect her from the monsters that were about to attack. His sword started blocking, and with his feet, he kicked those monsters away. The captain was already feeling better and could now help in the fight. The two then ran side by side with their weapons, ready to face that horde of monsters. They were running so fast that they were close to reaching the final forest. Once again, that monstrosity opened its mouth. A bright neon-colored light started forming from it. Even with the imminent attack, neither of them thought about stopping, and when the monster launched that power, the two simply dodged it. The protagonist shouted to the captain that everything behind them was now clear and that she could approach. She understood and ran at full speed, dodging the attacks from that colossal beast's paw. Now feeling more confident, she aimed her arrows at the monster and activated her saga once again. The witch who never missed her arrows, and indeed, all of them found their mark and began hitting that massive enemy. However, she noticed that the arrows passed straight through the body of that strange beast. She realized that she had drawn far too much attention from the monster toward herself. Now it was about to launch another attack, and she was right in its sights. When the creature quickly closed its mouth, intending to swallow her, she transformed. Now in her wolf form, she warned Tahoe that normal attacks wouldn't work on that boss. That's why she would use the power granted directly by the goddess she served. With that in mind, she would unleash her saga. While running, she activated the saga of a warrior who was like a storm. Gripping her sword's handle tightly, she screamed while charging toward that boss. Looking back, she noticed that the enormous beast already had its paw ready to strike her. She managed to dodge in time and position herself for another attack. The protagonist stood still, watching with the sensation that he had cut something. However, when he looked at the paw, he noticed there was only a small scratch. Now he clenched his teeth, thinking that at this rate it would take a very long time to defeat it. However, the captain called him and asked him to mount her again because they would make an assault together. Meanwhile, the boss was preparing another luminous attack from its mouth. Noticing the power being launched, the two dodged, each to one side. The protagonist thought that this wasn't an enemy that could be defeated with simple attacks. That's why he asked the captain, in her wolf form, to buy him some time. He would use his saga of the dragon eyes that saw everything. While she tried to attack the monstrous beast, the protagonist focused on trying to locate a weak point. However, he realized that this boss fought the entire time in defense mode. Now he was sure that the great monster was merely protecting something. Judging by how it attacked the captain, it seemed like it wanted to defend something at all costs. While the protagonist observed, the captain did what she could to buy enough time. At a certain moment, she decided to attack differently. Knowing that regular attacks wouldn't work, she decided to use the power of the curse in her wolf witch state. With that, she charged at the boss to attack it. With nothing to fear, she started biting it fiercely. From a distance, the protagonist noticed how agile she was, biting the monster while it struggled. At one point, still with her mouth locked onto the monster, she looked at the protagonist. She couldn't take it anymore. She noticed he was running in the opposite direction, and that made her really angry. The protagonist was running towards several smaller monsters. He activated a power that made his eyes radiate with golden tones. With that, he destroyed several of them with just one strike. It seemed like he had found the solution to defeat the boss, as he knew the secret was elsewhere. He was now running toward the object that had caught his attention, a stone shaped like a sword, which he now held with both hands, trying to pull it out. Even imbued with the goddess's power, it was extremely difficult to pull it from the ground. The protagonist made exaggerated grimaces as he tried in vain to lift that thing from the floor. While doing that, he caught the monster's attention, which now growled at him. Even with the captain still on top of the boss, biting it, the monster wouldn't stop chasing after the protagonist. The enemy was ready to attack at any moment, and the protagonist had his back turned. With great effort, he managed to pull the stake out of the ground, and when he finally did, he stopped the monster's attack. Little by little, the boss began to fall apart the same way it had rebuilt itself before. The protagonist was still holding the stake with his arms raised. Strangely colored warriors were looking at him and pointing in his direction. They watched as the boss began disintegrating once again. Now they were ready to advance at any cost, even if it meant trampling over the enemy. After the protagonist pulled out the glowing stake, he just held it and looked down. It seemed like a huge portal had formed where the stake had been. He looked back to call the captain and told her he had found the exit. She lowered herself so he could mount her again. With that, he mounted her, and the two were determined to leave that place and return to Valhalla. The protagonist had a serious expression as he stared at the portal. The captain also had a very sad expression as she leaped with him into it. Now the two were about to cross the portal. They were no longer visible. Only a yellowish light remained after they passed through. Meanwhile, several warriors from that world were running toward the portal. On the way, they encountered some beasts, which they easily destroyed using their hammers. The warriors were defending their territory from those fierce beasts. They celebrated having defeated all the enemies, and now victory belonged to Valhalla. However, one of the warriors noticed the absence of the duo who had defeated the boss. They soon realized that the two had gone through the portal back to their own world. Thus, everyone decided that they too would throw themselves into that portal. Meanwhile, the fight continued. Now the Valkyrie Rasrid was directly facing the flaming giant with determination. She kept her sword raised, gripping it tightly while holding her position on the battlefield with unwavering resolve. Raising her right hand to the sky, she unleashed a powerful magical strike against the flaming opponent. The enemy retaliated immediately, creating a collision of blue and orange energies that lit up everything. They stared each other down, struggling to withstand as the battle raged intensely, both waiting for reinforcements to arrive. The exchanged blows echoed like thunder, as both warriors advanced and retreated without hesitation across the field. At a certain moment, they both shouted together, preparing to summon even greater powers to decide the fight. Dust clouds from their clashes were visible from afar as they once again took position, ready for combat. At the peak of that fierce clash, a portal slowly opened between Rasrid and the flaming giant. The intense brightness blinded the vision of both combatants, causing them to momentarily halt their coordinated attacks. Even the giant lava monster stepped back, bothered by the light emanating from the portal. The Valkyrie stared at the portal in shock, not knowing what kind of being could emerge from it. That was when the protagonist and Ciri, now in human form, appeared, falling in front of the Valkyrie. Rasrid was caught off guard, surprised by the sudden appearance of those two in the middle of the battle. The two landed between the opponents, causing the Valkyrie to scream, fearing that something terrible had happened. But the lava giant had no intention of waiting and quickly prepared to attack again without mercy. Its eyes locked onto the artifact the hero carried, an object of great unknown dimensional value. The giant reached out toward the protagonist, trying to quickly grab that mystical artifact. The danger escalated, and the two were under serious threat from the monster's overwhelming power. The Valkyrie ran to protect them, determined not to let them be harmed right before her eyes. Suddenly, another explosion of dust and light burst forth between the battlefield and the combatants. Ghost warriors who had arrived with the protagonist were now fighting to contain the enraged monster. The Valkyrie could hardly believe that these were the same warriors who had departed earlier. They shouted that they would hold the enemy at any cost, demanding permission to fight with honor. More warriors emerged from the portal, all eager to partake in yet another glorious battle. Even with the strength of the flame giant, the ghosts were many and advanced relentlessly. One of the warriors recognized Rasgrid, asking for her permission to partake in his final decisive battle. The Valkyrie raised her sword, granting solemn permission before all the warrior spirits present. With the blessing granted, all the ghosts became mortal once again, regaining the form they had before their fall. They were overjoyed to be able to fight once more and fulfill their duty amidst the war. Without hesitation, they charged furiously against the lesser wolves surrounding the bloody battlefield. The fight grew to enormous proportions as capsules launched more creatures from the enemy army onto the plains. The giant roared, opening its mouth in fury, trying to banish the warriors who stood in its way. But the Valkyrie stepped in front of it, declaring herself its opponent and the protector of the others. While she fought the monster, Ciri, the protagonist, and the archer regrouped among the warriors. Rolf asked how they managed to return so quickly since they had just left for the village. The protagonist looked at Ciri and remarked that time probably flowed differently over there. Ciri ran, saying they should hurry and join the warriors, fighting with all their might. Once again, the protagonist grabbed her cloak, asking her to wait before rushing in. He pointed at the giant and suggested they should deal with the real boss on the field. Ciri made an angry face, especially when she saw him mounted on her back again during the run. The protagonist noticed how exhausted she was, with clear signs of fatigue overtaking her body. Even so, they pressed on together toward the enemy, and he encouraged her to hold on a bit longer. He explained that the goal wasn't to deal damage but to directly target the ogre's consciousness. From afar, it could be seen that Rasrid and the giant were evenly matched, neither overpowering the other. If it was possible to distract him for a few seconds, the allies would have a decisive advantage in the fight. The protagonist launched multiple weapons at the enemy, trying to catch its attention quickly and accurately. The giant, however, mocked them, saying they were just weak annoyances of no real importance. It declared that it would eliminate Rasrid first, then destroy everyone else present without hesitation. Ciri complained that they were so exhausted they couldn't even distract that monster for a moment. At that moment, the Valkyrie shouted, staring at the giant with a completely different and piercing gaze. The enemy reacted strangely, seeming distracted by something invisible that abruptly consumed its focus. Noticing the opportunity, the protagonist raised his hand as if holding an invisible celestial arrow. Using only the power of dignity, he launched that energy directly against the monster's body. The Valkyrie watched as the giant thrashed, struck squarely by that unexpected and divine force. She then unleashed her true power, her eyes shining with uncontrollable and blazing holy light. Raising the sword that split the heavens, she attacked with a force that tore through the elements. The protagonist smiled from afar, satisfied, knowing the Valkyrie was fighting with everything she had. The blow brought the giant crashing to the ground, causing the immediate collapse of morale among the lesser enemies. With their leader fallen, the opponents hesitated, giving the now enraged warriors the upper hand in the fight. The hero lay down on the ground, staring at the dust around him and breathing deeply in relief. Ciri looked at him in admiration, realizing she was in the presence of someone truly remarkable and formidable. As she rested, she thought to herself that she wished to fight by his side for a long time to come. When the battle ended, the ghosts returned to their original forms, deeply grateful to the Valkyrie Rasgrid. She opened her hands and guided the spirits once more, leading them toward their well-deserved eternal rest. Raising her sword, she freed those honored souls, returning them to the place from which they had come. A great beam of light appeared, gently pulling the spirits back into their primordial spiritual existence. Before leaving, they thanked the hero of Idun for his help and for the opportunity to fight once more. One of them said he would proudly tell Odin about the glorious battle they had fought together. The protagonist placed his hand over his chest in respect, watching them disappear beneath the divine rainbow. Everyone around watched in silence as that sacred light carried the warriors back to the heavens. The Valkyrie, seeing him with back pain, said he had overdone it during the fight. Rasgrid informed him that the other two Valkyries would arrive soon and that she would lead the rest to them. Surely Ciri and the protagonist were very happy upon hearing the Valkyrie's kind words. Rasgrid had a strange expression as she brought her hands toward the protagonist's face. Moments later, she placed her hands on his cheeks, and the boy immediately widened his eyes. She then lowered her forehead slightly and kissed it, making him blush within seconds. While the Valkyrie repeated the gesture with Ciri, the protagonist felt surprised for having been caught off guard. That made him remember the blessing he had previously received from his Valkyrie Hida with great emotion. Now he understood that the blessings from Valkyries were given through a symbolic kiss. He was lucky to receive the blessing of a powerful Valkyrie, always accompanied by Odin's raven. Meanwhile, in the structure located on top of the mountain, a small bird trembled with pure fear. The colorful-haired woman was destroying everything around her in yet another rage outburst. She couldn't accept that the two giants had failed so miserably in their recent mission. In truth, she didn't care if the attack had failed, because spreading embers was her real goal. Now enraged, she realized that the seed they were looking for was in the hands of the determined protagonist. Her fury grew as the nearby purple mist silently observed everything that was happening. In the distance, the one truly controlling everything was the half-spider man, weaving dark webs. He believed that the woman was losing her mind because the king hadn't said anything about her failure. Even so, he suspected that another reason was leading the kingdom to remain silent about that matter. He imagined that everything was happening exactly as the king had foreseen from the beginning. Elsewhere, two Valkyries were flying over a forest area with a great sense of urgency. They were approaching the protagonist and Captain Ciri after a successfully completed mission. They were the same Valkyries previously mentioned by Rasgrid. With a certain reverence and respect, they landed gracefully near the two warriors who were waiting while sitting. They apologized for being late, understanding that both of them must have been completely exhausted. They requested that the protagonist briefly summarize everything that had happened during the mission. Without even hesitating, he showed the strange object he had acquired as a result of that battle. The golden-haired Valkyrie summoned a magical box to safely store the artifact. As soon as she sealed the box, she asked them both to rest, saying they would discuss the details later. Once again, a Valkyrie held the protagonist's cheeks, making his eyes widen. Right after, he received another blessing in the form of a gentle kiss on his forehead. While the Valkyrie did the same with Ciri, he remained embarrassed by the situation. A third Valkyrie noticed his discomfort and asked if something was wrong at that moment. The protagonist, staring at the Valkyrie, asked if she wouldn't give him her blessing as well. Smiling, she brought her hands to his cheeks while he closed his eyes. Trying to stay calm, he opened his eyes and saw the Valkyrie getting extremely close. She held his face firmly and gave him a gentle kiss on his blushing cheek. The unexpected gesture made him incredibly red with so much closeness and direct contact. The Valkyrie smiled, seeing how embarrassed he had gotten from that affectionate gesture. She said that kiss represented her blessing, even though it was different from the others given. He had expected a kiss on the forehead, so he was surprised when he received it softly on the cheek. The protagonist didn't realize that his Valkyrie, Hida, had witnessed the entire unexpected scene. She was standing behind him, visibly furious, her narrowed eyes filled with jealousy. When he saw her, he was genuinely happy and showed his joy clearly on his face. Ciri observed the reunion and noticed how the protagonist's gestures were dominated by euphoria. However, it was clear that Hida hadn't liked the recent situation at all. While the two exchanged silent grimaces, Captain Ciri thought they looked like two children. Soon after, several magical coffins were launched into the skies, and the protagonist was inside one. His Valkyrie simply watched in silence as he departed after receiving the 3 blessings. Inside the coffin, with his eyes closed, he coughed, hoping the trip would end soon. Hida couldn't resist and approached the coffin, while Ciri watched with a slight smile. Hida explained that it was just a joke. Many others would do the cleanup, so he could rest in peace. Relieved, he sighed, grateful that he wouldn't have to repeat that uncomfortable experience anytime soon. She tucked her hair behind her ear, showing a bit of shyness in that unexpected moment. With a slight gesture on her lips, she slowly approached the floating coffin. She leaned in completely, her cheeks blushing, and kissed the sleeping protagonist. With that, she cast the blessing of the goddess Idun upon him, which remained strong. Even so, when she pulled away, he became deeply flushed, just as she was. He didn't know if it was from the blessing or exhaustion, but he soon fell deeply asleep. In a dark forest, the great king of the gods, Odin, walked with the aid of his staff. His steps were firm as he made his way toward an important meeting of ancient gods. Upon arriving, he found the red-haired, long-braided Thor, the god of thunder, waiting. Thor was fully equipped, wearing his shining armor and standing imposingly as always. In Odin's hands was the object the protagonist had previously delivered to the Valkyrie. Apparently, Odin planned to deliver that important object directly to the god Thor. Joining the conversation was also the wise mimer, counselor to the king of the gods. The head resting on the pedestal spoke with wisdom about the wolf garmer. Odin seemed to agree that the gains would be small compared to the enormous effort required. Thor remained silent, merely observing the artifact and listening attentively to the two. At a certain point, the wise mimer lowered his eyebrows with a visible expression of sadness. A cruel memory invaded his thoughts, preventing him from hiding the pain on his face. Odin also changed his expression upon hearing what the sage had just said. Mimir declared that when the wolf awakened, Odin would become nothing more than dog food. Now it showed a large castle where the sun shone gently and snow fell constantly. That huge castle with a light at the top was being visited by someone. This person approached the king who was seated on his throne, and the man with intense red eyes said that the preparations were now complete. Now the magic king Olgard Loki listened as the man said that the 5 fingers were in motion. Then the traitor Loki warned the king that soon the war would be active once again. That man had extremely red eyes and white hair. Meanwhile, back at the meeting with Odin, he continued his conversation with Thor. They also listened to the sage's advice, who said that after gathering enough fragments, Odin knew that among them there was someone capable of using the sagas. His eyes radiated with power just from having to mention Loki's name. However, Odin had a request to make to Thor, and he simply waited to hear what it was. With the fragment in hand, Odin asked Thor to destroy it immediately. Even after hearing his father's words, Thor couldn't understand why Odin would make such a request. But the king of the gods was certain that this was the most reliable way to prevent the resurrection of the hound. Odin turned his back to Thor and said that now that the enemy had revealed their intentions, they had to get involved. Elsewhere, the goddess was pleased to see her warrior Lee Tahoe once again. He was kneeling before his goddess once more, and she sat beneath a great tree of golden apples. He listened as she said that the warrior had accomplished great feats. Pleased, she told him that she would give him the reward as promised, and he thought it would be the celestial saddle wing of the horse. She told him that he could choose whatever he wanted. Seeing how easily she played with her words, he knew she was merely teasing him, so she would indeed consider giving him the saddle wing of the celestial horse, which he knew very well. She held that saddle, and it seemed heavy for her. That saddle was so perfect, imbued with magical powers to tame beasts. The protagonist began imagining how he could make the best use of it. The goddess was entertained, watching how focused he was on that kind of thought. Meanwhile, outside the goddess's domain, the Valkyrie Hida and his mentor were waiting. They looked at the protagonist as he came out of the meeting with the goddess, wanting to know how it went. As he walked out with his saddle, he thought there might be another chance to get the wing, the celestial horse's wing. Meanwhile, the man kept watching the protagonist, thinking that he had something important to say. Looking at the protagonist, he said that since he had grown stronger, they could now advance his training. The Valkyrie agreed but wanted the man to at least give the protagonist 1 day of rest. He simply listened as the two discussed what they had planned for him, but he had something to say. He wanted them both to help him with something he really needed to do. Then the scene showed the warriors lodging once more. Now both of them wanted to know what exactly he was scheming. They both looked at the pile of tools he was restoring. It even seemed like he was about to open a shop. The redhead knew that all those items were magical and wanted to know if he had obtained them during the Great War. Now the man thought that, after restoring them, the protagonist should return each item to its own religion. Hearing this from his mentor, the protagonist seemed to agree with his words. And with that, both of them looked at the protagonist, seemingly feeling a certain pride in him. Hida got very excited and thought they should start sorting them by legion as soon as possible. So the three of them began dividing the tools by each legion. When the Valkyrie picked up one of them, she felt a different kind of presence. And holding that broken tool, she felt somewhat embarrassed to admit that she didn't know which legion it belonged to. The man thought it might belong to another pantheon, like that sword fragment from before. That made the protagonist very interested, so he decided to check it out. He held that tool firmly in his hands and was about to use his all-seeing eyes. He wanted to try activating it with the warrior's sword saga, just like he did with the other fragment. As soon as he activated his eyes, he also activated the saga simultaneously. It made the entire lodging glow, both inside and outside. With that, both the Valkyrie and his mentor were impressed. However, after all the glowing, the three of them looked bored because nothing happened. The protagonist, trembling and a bit awkward, said he didn't know what he had done wrong for nothing to happen. Then, shortly after, his own eyes began to glow with a yellow tone. Agnar pointed his finger at the protagonist and asked everyone to look at the wall behind him. When they looked at the wall, they saw something playing as if the wall was a giant screen. In the image, someone was inside a boat in the middle of the ocean. That person was alone in the boat, seemingly heading towards somewhere. It was clear that the shore was getting closer, and that young man was happy to have finally found what he had been searching for. As soon as he reached the shore, he left the boat and continued walking. He was near a large structure with massive gates. That was the castle of the Queen of the Land of Shadows, and the young man was entering that place. He had heard that this woman ate people and bathed in the blood of beautiful maidens, and now he could see with his own eyes whether that was true or just a myth, because the woman standing before him would soon become his mentor. She had a calm and patient appearance, completely different from everything people said about her. Over time, he came to love and deeply respect her, and at a certain point, she gave him something. It was on the day he left the Castle of Shadows that he received a white spear, with snow made from the bones of a monster. He gripped his spear tightly and tried out light strikes to test it. From that day forward, he only knew victory, wielding that spear and using the knowledge he had gained. With that, his name spread across many places, ruins where he passed and destroyed the monsters. But one day, he found himself in a complicated situation, kneeling before a man with white hair. The man looked at him, kneeling with serious injuries, and called him Prince of Light, and with his head bowed, he had to listen to the other person say he had failed to protect everything he loved. However, when that white-haired man turned to climb the staircase, ordered him to stop. He charged with everything he had toward Loki, gripping his spear, his eyes filled with pure hatred. Loki, the traitor, simply stared at the young man with his red, disdainful eyes. Even trying with all his strength, that young man was not able to defeat Loki. His weapon was shattered into many pieces, and with that, the world of Area was destroyed. That entire story was seen through the eyes of the protagonist, who was projecting the memory onto the wall. Now, the two standing beside the protagonist realized that those memories belonged to an ancient warrior. Lee Tahoe was still holding the weapon, mouth slightly open, and his eyes wide like two headlights. Ragnar approached and observed the protagonist carefully. After a few slaps, he helped him snap back to normal. As soon as he regained consciousness, the protagonist placed his hand on his head and asked who that person was. He was told that the young man had once been considered the strongest man in the destroyed world of Area. The young man revealed that after seeing the memories contained in the weapon, he could now see its name. He said it was a fragment of Gibolg, which made Ragnar shudder at the possibility. Worried, he asked the protagonist not to try using any saga with that weapon for now. He explained that it was a kind of spell, like a magical vow. He also said that Q Chulain must have had many powerful spells, and that magical items became even stronger after their owners died. Ragnar remarked that, besides being dangerous, the weapon might not even accept a new owner. The protagonist asked if, by showing the memories, the weapon wanted to reveal what kind of person its former master had been. With that fragment in hand, he promised he would become stronger to be worthy of wielding it. Agnar thought that was the right attitude for a warrior and showed his pride. Raising his hand toward the Valkyrie, the protagonist told her he had something important to ask. She looked attentively as he asked if there was any way to get a good mount. He said it didn't need to be something that could fly, and then he remembered the Dark Elves' horses and the White Silent. He brought his hand to his head, sweating, and swore that he would never tell anyone that, when choosing the saddle, he had thought about Captain Siri. The Valkyrie apologized and explained that their legion did not have specific summons for that purpose. Agnar, who was watching while seated, said that if he wanted an ordinary horse, he could simply buy one, but it would be better to find a superior mount. He thought it was preferable to go to a wild region and search for a worthy mount. This proposal surprised not only the protagonist but also Hida. Smiling, Ragnar suggested they could capture a wild griffin. He said he knew a place between the border of Asgard and the Limbo where wild griffins lived. He warned that the round trip would take some time and asked Hida if that would be okay. The young woman smiled excitedly and said they would find a way to make it work. Ragnar stated that as soon as Hida gave them the green light, they could set off and also train along the way. The protagonist got excited about the idea of getting a griffin as his new mount. After everything was settled, Hida had already been driving the carriage for a while. She seemed happy, even humming as she drove. Meanwhile, Ragnar watched the two in front of him without a friendly expression. In a way, he was conducting a training session with the protagonist and Captain Siri. The captain, who was technically on vacation, took the opportunity but couldn't escape training under Ragnar's watchful eyes. After observing them for a good while, he announced a break. Both were panting and showing clear signs of fatigue. Ragnar asked Hida to pull the carriage over so everyone could rest. They stopped for a brief pause, accompanied by a meal, while the horses also caught their breath. Ragnar was handling a rack of ribs, preparing a nutritious meal. He placed the meat over the coals to roast and feed everyone. Then he raised his hand, holding a utensil, and began slicing the ribs, dividing them into equal portions. He lifted one piece as if it were a trophy, and handed it first to the protagonist. The protagonist found Ragnar's meal excellent and ate while the others simply watched. Everyone around seemed to have high expectations for the protagonist and admired his calm demeanor. Ragnar asked Siri what she thought about joining the Legion of Idun, since that way he could train her all the time. She said nothing, only looked at the protagonist, who, with his mouth full, said it was a great idea. Slightly blushing, Siri said she couldn't abandon her companions from the Legion of Ullr. After eating, they dismantled the improvised camp and set off once again. The carriage returned to the road, following a dirt path among large trees in a forest. Now Ragnar was the one driving, allowing Hida to rest. After a while, they switched again, and Hida resumed control. Then, with Ragnar already outside the carriage, he looked at Hida and said this was a good spot. She kept guiding the horses, which began to glow with an intense light. While petting the animals, Ragnar explained that griffins loved horse meat and they would use that as bait. Quickly, movement was noticed in the skies, with several birds flapping their wings toward them. Even though the forest seemed calm, Ragnar noticed the creatures approaching. The protagonist and Siri immediately went on alert. Looking up and seeing the griffins, the hero was amazed as 3 of them were flying across the sky. Ragnar crossed his arms and announced that he would just watch, leaving the hard work to the 2 of them. Siri told the protagonist that she would prepare the paralyzing poison and was already organizing her arrows. Meanwhile, the protagonist opened his magic bag and pulled an item from it. He grabbed his favorite magic item, the falcon wingsuit. This surprised not only Hida, but also Captain Siri. The 2 of them watched him without understanding what was going through his mind. Hida, for a moment, looked away, slightly blushing. Feeling at his peak, he quickly chanted the magic spell. He transformed into a beautiful falcon and began soaring through the sky. The 2 watched in silence, with no words to describe the scene. They even glanced at each other as if asking whether either of them understood what was happening. Both blushed slightly and tried to hide it. Seeing the 2 acting like that, the protagonist asked if he should have asked which one of them he should ride with. While the protagonist soared through the skies on a griffin, a winged creature tried to attack him directly. He managed to dodge because he was smaller and agile, avoiding the griffin's claws without much trouble. The griffin didn't understand what had happened, thinking that simply squeezing its claws would be enough to crush him. It only noticed that the target had simply flown away and took the opportunity to fire paralyzing arrows with surprising speed. She, always well-positioned and alert to everything, used the opening to act immediately. Now the griffin was paralyzed mid-air, falling helplessly without being able to defend itself properly. The protagonist realized that one was already taken down and proceeded to face the next opponents. Now he had to deal with 2 griffins charging at him with full force. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the leader of the griffin group was sleeping peacefully in his isolated hideout. After a while, he woke up feeling uneasy, realizing the hunting females of the group had been gone for too long. He stopped and looked toward the direction they had gone, noticing how much time had passed since their departure. He figured the females were secretly devouring everything without leaving even crumbs for the alpha male. He took off hastily, flapping his massive wings that kicked up a curtain of dust from the ground. While flying through the skies, he followed the scent of the females to guide him precisely along the right path. He flew at full speed, following the olfactory trail of the females toward enemy territory. Meanwhile, the female hit by anesthetic arrows remained asleep on the ground, completely vulnerable to the environment. Agnaldo stated that the job was almost done and they should proceed to the second phase. Meanwhile, mounted on the captured female, the protagonist said he was waiting for a signal to proceed. The bird suddenly started flying scared, indicating that something much bigger and more threatening was approaching fast. The protagonist noticed the movement and alerted Ragnar, who advised him to be cautious with the alpha. Dosenho, the protagonist, grabbed a magical rope that, if used correctly, would completely tame the creature. While waiting in the air, the alpha griffin was coming at him with full strength and a direct charge. The protagonist smiled, admiring the beauty of the animal, eager to make it his next magical and imposing mount. Rollo, however, didn't like that smile at all and reacted furiously upon seeing the human. The situation got even worse when he noticed the human sitting on his female with a goofy smile. The alpha increased his speed, determined to strike the human with full power and absolutely no mercy. The hero clearly had a plan and, at the right moment, avoided the strike with astonishing skill. The griffin flew past, not realizing the human was no longer there. The alpha only noticed the human was gone after looking at the now unprotected female. When he looked up, he saw a hawk and realized the human had magically transformed into it. For the alpha, the form didn't matter. Hawk meat seemed just as tasty and interesting. The griffin then charged straight at the hawk, determined to devour it immediately without hesitation. The protagonist dodged skillfully, positioning himself above the griffin's neck with undeniable precision and courage. At the perfect moment, he chanted the magic song that allowed him to transform back into human form. As soon as he changed back, he quickly mounted the griffin's neck, holding the rope firmly and decisively. He managed to place the magical rope around the griffin's neck with precise and simultaneous magical movements. The creature reacted in fury, desperately trying to shake off the human now riding on its back. It thrashed violently, doing everything it could to get the human off immediately without resistance. But the protagonist held on tight despite the difficulty, determined not to give up on this special conquest. The griffin flew wildly, trying to discourage the human with sharp maneuvers and erratic, disjointed flights. Neither intended to back down, but the griffin began showing clear and obvious signs of exhaustion. The creature didn't understand why it was so tired, unaware of the limiting power of the magical rope. The protagonist then noticed an opening in the griffin's behavior and decided to act with absolute speed. He drew his broken sword fragment, ready to use that material to seal the creature's fate. But Ragnar and Hida, watching from below, couldn't quite figure out what the hero intended to do. The protagonist, experienced after so many consecutive battles, had greatly improved his knowledge and powerful magical strategies. He had reached 20% synchronization and had also acquired a new saga extremely useful in combat. With it, he could summon a special hammer capable of enhancing any saga with absolute and lasting power. He then activated the saga of the blacksmith's hammer that never fails, sealing his fate with magic. By casting this saga onto the rope, he further reinforced the magic surrounding the griffin's neck. With that, he finally determined the outcome of that clash between himself and the wild, threatening creature. The griffin, with its last remaining energy, was about to be completely dominated by the fearless protagonist's strength. At that moment, the hero discovered the creature's name and smiled with sincere admiration. He felt excited realizing he had successfully tamed such a fierce and previously respected creature. The griffin looked at him with hatred at first, suspicious of the determined human's presence and intentions. But when the hero invoked his new saga, the griffin couldn't resist the overwhelming power presented. The Dragon Tamer saga was now active, granting the hero control over imposing magical creatures. With the effects of the new saga, the griffin was beginning to become tame and obedient to its new master. The hostility began to fade, giving way to a gradual and growing obedience under the magical influence of the saga. Ragnar, watching from below, clearly noticed the moment when the hero completely tamed the powerful griffin. Now that he had conquered it, he would need proper reins and armor to turn it into his definitive mount. The redhead, excited by the victory, said they could arrange everything and start over with renewed enthusiasm. Everyone suddenly got startled when a strange sound began echoing from an undefined direction. Looking up at the sky, they noticed signals of urgency coming from opposite directions, causing widespread concern. Ragnar immediately recognized the sound and understood that it was an urgent distress call. The problem was that it came from opposite sides, indicating a coordinated attack by many enemies at once. The Valkyrie then warned that everyone should split up to deal with the emerging threats immediately. With that, the redhead transformed into a goose and told Ciri to mount without hesitation. Ida looked back, concerned, and spoke to the protagonist, asking him to be very careful. He, serious and determined, answered by looking directly at her that he would be as careful as possible. Ragnar, quickly mounting with the hero, said they should hurry to reach the rendezvous point. The protagonist, used to riding with beautiful women, now felt uncomfortable with that new improvised formation. However, wasting no time, both launched themselves toward the horizon with courage and determination renewed by the mission. Riding the conquered griffin, the protagonist asked Rollo to fly as fast as possible without hesitation. After some time flying on the griffin, the two spotted a devastated area down below. The protagonist found it strange since they hadn't traveled far and had only crossed a few mountains. Ragnar seemed to have noticed something, so he pointed in the direction for the protagonist to look as well. From above, they could see a battle in progress, and it seemed to be against yet another giant. Looking down beyond the giant, they also spotted familiar faces of well-known warriors. Among them was Braski, the warrior from Thor's Legion, directly engaged in combat. It was exactly this warrior who was facing the giant with admirable ferocity and fury. When the enemy launched a powerful attack, the warrior of Thor blocked it with firmness and courage. But the situation was critical because there wasn't just one, but two giants fighting there. Without hesitation, Ragnar jumped straight from the griffin into the fervent and dangerous battlefield. As soon as he landed, he began unleashing his divine powers, becoming covered in golden magic. The protagonist realized that Ragnar didn't want to waste any time and jumped down without thinking. He descended with conviction, already having chosen his target, the giant with reddish hair. Without hesitation, he sliced his blade through the red-haired giant's head, bringing him down with ease. Everyone around stood slack-jawed at Ragnar's performance, pointing at him in astonishment. Meanwhile, the protagonist headed toward where the warrior of Thor was still fighting. He pointed forward and ordered the griffin to fly as fast as it could. The griffin understood perfectly and slashed its claws across the giant's face with feline precision. This created an excellent opening for the warrior of Thor to unleash his most powerful attack. Taking advantage of the distraction, he landed a violent blow to the monster's stomach, sinking his blade in. The impact caused such intense pain that the giant lowered his already exposed guard even further. Seeing the perfect opportunity, the warrior prepared to use all his legendary strength and struck once more, even more powerfully than before, right into the giant's chest. When the monster dropped to its knees, the warrior lunged forward with his axe in hand. The warrior's eyes glowed with thunder and lightning as he screamed in Thor's name, and it was while shouting for his god that he delivered the final blow with uncontrollable divine fury. All the warriors of Valhalla cheered euphorically at the impressive feat that had just been achieved. On the other side, where Ragnar was, the warriors screamed and celebrated his heroic act. Meanwhile, the protagonist was recognized as the one who rode a legendary Valkyrie. Although satisfied, he thought they could at least call him by name like they did with the others. After some time, the griffin landed on its big paws, raising dust as it touched the ground. The hero greeted the warrior of Thor, who returned the gesture with sincere respect and joy. Now all the warriors were staring at the griffin, amazed by its imposing winged presence. They wanted to know which legion that Valkyrie belonged to, the one he was proudly riding. The protagonist explained that it wasn't a Valkyrie, but a male griffin of great power. With that, the warriors visibly showed disappointment. Some even turned their backs without saying a word. However, Brasky warned that it wasn't over yet, and that it wasn't the time to get distracted. Ragnar approached, heard the words, and wanted to know more details about the situation there. When the warrior told them that they had found something called the soul fragment of Garmr, both were shocked. He continued saying that the giants almost reached the fragment at the same time as the warriors. He answered Ragnar's question by saying they got close, but they couldn't recover it. The fragment was on the head of a ferocious beast, which made everything even harder. Everyone knew that wild boars were extremely dangerous, not even the giants could defeat it. The warrior explained that the giants left troops behind to try to hold off the warriors. Ragnar then supposed that the beast had been corrupted by the fragment and that there might still be time. When the protagonist realized it, he was already mounted on the griffin again next to Ragnar. Used to riding beautiful Valkyries, he was now flying on a male griffin with another warrior. With a discouraged look, he told the warrior that they would fly ahead to intercept. Brasky, smiling and fiddling with a small magic pouch, said there was nothing to worry about. He turned the pouch upside down, and a few bones fell scattered onto the ground. Soon, the pile of bones started to form on the floor, resembling the silhouette of an animal. With an enchantment, the warrior of Thor summoned a small magical goat in the middle of the field. The protagonist found the goat very beautiful, and Ragnar said it was good enough for an inferior warrior. The warrior was satisfied with his summoning and smiled proudly at the mystical creature. He called the animal by its true name, and then the goat's eyes began to shine intensely. It transformed into a young, muscular goat, radiating power with every step it took. Soon, it became an adult goat, even more muscular, almost monstrous in how strong it looked. The potential of that creature seemed to have no limits, and everyone was impressed by it. When the goat looked seriously at the warrior, he said it was a treasure of Thor. Ragnar ordered them to hurry. Some would stay to care for the wounded while others pressed forward. After that, the two continued mounted on the griffin while the warriors honored them with loud cheers. The now giant goat grabbed several warriors with its hands and set off, carrying everyone at high speed. Meanwhile, the protagonist asked Rollo to go as fast as possible without hesitation. But the giant goat wasn't falling behind either, running with enormous legs and unstoppable determination. The protagonist didn't like seeing that they were almost being overtaken by the powerful goat. Thor's legion shouted, cheering the goat on to run faster and win the race in the sky. They were so fast that they soon spotted three giants and the monstrous boar lying among the wreckage. Ragnar commented that, even fallen, the fragment still hadn't been recovered by anyone. They were quickly detected by the enemies, and several of them would try to stop them from advancing toward the target. Upon seeing the goat and the griffin side by side, the enemies began preparing for the inevitable fight. The giants now had to run to reach the fragment before it was too late. Ragnar noticed there were 4 giants, and the rest of the group consisted of 100 orcs. He warned that he would take care of the giants while the protagonist and another warrior handled the rest. He shouted with all his strength that it was time to retrieve the soul fragment of Garmr. With that, the 2 warriors charged at full speed toward the glowing fragment on the ground. They ran and flew so fast that they left a trail of dust behind them. Together with Captain Siri, they were going full throttle, and managed to bring down one of the giants. They shouted the name of Valhalla and the 9 realms, igniting the hearts of everyone in total war. Meanwhile, Ciri was talking with Valkyrie Hida about the situation they were facing. On her side, everything had been completed, and she believed it was time to help the boys now. But an intense light caught Hida's attention, and she suddenly felt immense pressure around her. They were the artifacts used to launch warriors, scattered across the skies like flaming meteors. The two looked up and realized they were falling in massive numbers, like a storm. The Valkyrie was so frustrated that she fell to her knees, feeling the weight of the moment. She felt the presence of a power so immense that she never imagined could appear there.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.